Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the SELEP Strategic Board meeting. Amy, I'm going to ask you for any apologies.
Certainly. So we have apologies from Jeff Miles, and we'll have Andrew Metcalf as an alternative.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, Andrew.
And we also have apologies from Aideen Sadler and David Monk.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as is our custom these days with these webinars, we will be recording the meeting and the recording will go on the website as is now normal. Just to remind everyone of the normal rules that we have around Zoom meetings, that people should keep themselves muted except when speaking, and should use the raise hand function when you wish to speak, and then I will call them in the order that is indicated to me by the raised hand function. If I could discourage people from using the chat function for any items that are material to the discussion, as they're not publicly accessible and we want to be as transparent as possible. Should we move to votes, we will ask that people lower raised hands between any consecutive votes so that we are crystal clear on the numbers of votes for any particular item. It also is really important that people keep their declaration of interests up to date, and I should ask if anyone has any interest to declare at this time for any of the matters that are under discussion this morning. Yes. So Karen, good morning.
Yeah, I need to declare an interest under item 5.
Thank you, indeed. That's the medical school.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Karen. Anybody else? Yes, Sarah.
I have no pecuniary interest, but the sector support fund bid on the cultural one came out of the South East Creative Economy Network grouping, which I co-chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
Got Perry with a raised hand and Andrew
Perry,
with a
yes,
raised hand.
Sorry, Perry with a raised hand and?
Andrew.
Okay, so Perry, you go first.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would have an interest in items 11 if we get into any detail on free ports.
Of course, thank you very much for that. And then Andrew, I think you had wanted to raise a hand.
Yes, good morning. My agency acts on behalf of NIAB EMR and Discovery Park.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Declarations of interest? No? Thank you so much. Okay. In that case, could I ask for any comments on the minutes of the 2nd of October meeting? We've had nothing in advance, but if there are no comments, no comments, fine. In that case, are people happy for me to sign those as an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you. There are a couple of matters arising. Adam, I think you're going to give an update on the timing of the launch of the skills and business support COVID calls.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So just to make board members aware that we've been progressing through procurement on both the skills call and the business support call, as you would expect us to do. Obviously, they're fairly unique as well, which is why the procurement processes have taken slightly longer, perhaps, than they might have done. Almost there. What we're going to do, though, is launch on the 6th of January, rather than do it over the course of the coming few days, because we've had some pretty strong and very understandable feedback for potential bidders, etc., that having this to do and as an additional task over this Christmas, given the year that everybody's just had, wouldn't be that welcome. So moving it to the first week of January gives us that opportunity to absolutely cross every T and dot every I, and we will start rolling with putting everything out at that stage.
Thank you, Adam. The other thing I should just note is that unusually, I attended the last accountability board. That's only the second accountability board that I have attended in 5.5 years as chair. Normally, of course, I don't attend those meetings. I would just like to say, first of all, how well chaired it was by Sarah, but secondly, how smoothly it went. So I wanted to thank colleagues from the accountable body and all other colleagues who attended. It was a lot of projects to discuss, and I thought it went very well, and some difficult issues which were dealt with in an exemplary fashion. I have a feeling that the next accountability board may also be quite a meaningful one, because there'll be projects that well, we have to decide whether they're going to go forward or not. So if Sarah and other members of the board are content, it may be a good idea for me to attend that one too, but I leave that to Sarah and the members of the Accountability Board to extend an invitation if they feel it is relevant.
Always welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we'll see. I mean, we'll see how it goes. I mean, yeah, I think it's going to be in February. And I think it will be quite meaningful because there will have to be some fairly crunch decisions taken about projects where we either have to terminate them or do something else with them. So that will be quite a meaningful meeting. The other thing I should say before we get to the business, that after, depending on timing, after item 7, we will have a break for 10 minutes and to allow people to get a cup of tea, have a comfort break if necessary, but it will be 10 minutes. And Adam has assured me that he will be timing it punctiliously, so for a 10-minute break. Okay, great. So in that case, I would like to get into the item 3, which is the SELEP Economic Recovery and Renewal Strategy. At the last board meeting in September, we discussed the proposal to develop a SELEP recovery and renewal strategy to provide a clear strategic direction to inform activities in the short to medium term. The proposed priorities and framework for this strategy have subsequently been discussed at a workshop for board members, which took place in November. And I'm grateful to the many of you who were able to attend that. The details of the framework were updated to reflect those discussions and have been circulated with the papers for your further consideration. The purpose of the new strategy will be to provide a more relevant strategic framework to guide SELEP work going forward, and which we can use to continue to influence government and stakeholders regarding the most critical issues and opportunities for the SELEP economy. And in particular, actually following today's session on Brexit, I think that subject to this board approving, I think we would like to hold a series of round tables to monitor how the end of the transition period is faring, and in particular whether there are any issues that we and our members, our stakeholders, feel ought to be brought to the attention of government. We would like to invite certainly MPs, but also government ministers in the way that we did for the COVID roundtables earlier in the year. So that's something that we would like to think about. So under this item for the board, we're going to be asking you to endorse the strategic priorities and objectives set out in the framework. They would supersede those set out in the economic strategy statement and would form the basis of future decisions on the prioritization of projects for funding allocations. This endorsement will also enable the Secretariat to continue to progress the development of the strategy so that final content can be presented for approval by the board in March. In line with the approach taken by several other LEPs, this strategy will be a shorter document than the previous draft local industrial strategy, recognizing that detailed points of delivery will need to be developed and refined throughout 2021 as we learn more about the implications for the economy and also the wider policy and funding landscape, including the example, the refresh of the industrial strategy, which we understand will take place early next year. It is, however, important that we are in a position to proactively engage with these discussions at a local, regional, and national level, and having a clear strategic framework will help us to do that. I'm confident that the strategic priorities and objectives proposed in the strategy framework will remain relevant as they relate to the biggest economic challenges and opportunities in our area and have particular national significance. And we'll be able to refine our activities through delivery plans when required. Therefore, the decisions that are being asked of the board today is to agree the strategic priorities and objectives in the framework, and for these to be used to inform any new funding prioritization. I'm now going to hand over to Helen to set out some of the areas the board may wish to consider as part of that discussion. Helen.
Thank you, Chris. Morning, everybody. So just going on, sort of continuing from what Chris has said, it is intended that the content of the strategy is structured around the 4 strategic priorities and the objectives that are set out in that framework, and also the further detail that you have in the appendix that accompanied it. As you've seen, this will still cover quite a broad range of activities within those priorities, which we may well have wanted anyway, but particularly seems a sensible approach given the uncertainty around the policy and funding that we're facing at the moment. Excuse me, but by the nature of that, the strategy would inevitably require a fairly multi-layered approach to actually delivering it, including sort of influencing, lobbying, bringing partners together, and of course, making cases for funding and investment. We therefore felt that given these factors, we should also try and identify some clear areas where we feel SELEP has tangible opportunity to lead on or strongly influence, and that don't necessarily require large government funding to achieve. These particular activities could therefore be elevated within the strategy, and in helping to develop and progress them, we could demonstrate the innovation and added value that the LEP can bring to key issues within our area. And within this also make the arguments around the levelling up that is required within the South East region. We would therefore welcome the board's views on those issues that at a SELEP level and what we think those issues might be. Based on the discussions and engagements that we've had to date, we have some examples to share with you, which I'll run through shortly, and we'd be interested to hear your view on these, but of course indeed hear other suggestions that you may well have. So there's only a couple of them. I'll run through them quite quickly and then we can move on to the discussion. Sorry, if you bear with me. I was just going to, if you wouldn't mind, I was just going to share one slide which may just help to sort of illustrate while I'm talking, because I appreciate I'm going to try and cover quite a bit of content within these. Sorry, just sharing my screen. Can you see that?
I can't.
No, nothing. Sorry. Any joy?
Yep, it's coming.
It's starting to come.
Apologies. I don't know why it's
we're there. We're there.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so firstly, of the examples, we were looking at developing an intelligence-based approach to help shape the business support landscape. To best support businesses and the economy at large, we obviously need to understand not only what the demand for business support in SELEP is, but areas where interventions can best drive growth and productivity. Within this, there may well be scope for exploring new finance options, such as venture capital, to support companies in high growth sectors, but also provide opportunity to drive greater investment across the piece and the ability to capitalise on the likely increase in startups that we may well see resulting from the crisis. Secondly, realising the full economic and social benefits from major projects investments that are already underway or planned for within SELEP, and in this developing the local workforce and supply chains that underpin these significant opportunities. The SELEP Major Projects Group has already been established and has met a number of times to look at common issues, and projects currently on that include the Lower Thames Crossing, Bradwell B, the London Resort, and a number of our large housing developments. And in particular, this group is seeking to collaborate on activities and investments in areas such as skills, supply chain and research and innovation. And they're particularly keen on this in light of the EU transition and the implications of the Brexit transition. New projects can, of course, join this, and should we be successful, the investments in our new free ports would obviously be a key example of this. And we also feel this area of work could quite heavily focus on the levelling up agenda in supporting some of our more deprived communities in which these projects reside or have significant impact on. Thirdly, reimagining how we design our communities to be resilient and inclusive, responding to the accelerated changes in working and living patterns, including housing design, digital connectivity, access to amenities, and of course the positive impacts all of this can have on the environment. COVID-19 has undoubtedly accelerated change in the way we live and work, and this is highly likely to represent a permanent shift of some kind. And with the scale of development we have in SELEP, this is a unique opportunity to be quite a trailblazer in the research, design and implementation of our future communities. Part of this can involve learning from existing research around concepts such as the 15-minute city, as well as our own research into the impacts and needs of our own towns and communities. We can then use this to create a roadmap towards sort of aspirational future living that not only mitigates environmental impacts, but also reduces the disparities that exist within and between our communities. Lastly, but not least, pursuing economic renewal and prosperity through transformational infrastructure investment in our coastal areas and promoting the benefits of a connected coast as a catalyst for this investment. By addressing some of the core barriers, we could start developing and realising an ambition for a smart and connected coast, with climate change at the heart of that agenda. Working directly with providers at a LEP level, we could begin to tackle some infrastructure deficits that help deliver coastal infrastructure that's pioneering, particularly in areas such as sustainable energy and digital capabilities, thus giving us the potential to increase the social, environmental and economic outcomes for the coast. So they're just 4 examples that through our discussions and engagements, we're sort of sharing with you. And the objectives that are within the framework would of course underpin these as they would for the wider priorities. But we thought they could just help to sort of stimulate the conversation, but obviously we welcome your views and suggestions as to what these might be. So back to you, Chris, for the discussion.
Thank you.
I'll stop sharing.
Yes, thank you. That would be great. So, does anyone have any comments or observations on the strategic priorities that Helen has just set out? I mean, clearly, for me, where we can add value as a LEP, given our unique combination of a partnership between business-led, higher education, further education, and local authorities, is that we are very well placed to feed back to government some of the most pressing issues, reaction to the most pressing issues of the day. So those are broadly 2 key ones, clearly, how the economy is responding to COVID and what we can do to accelerate the recovery. And then secondly, as we've been discussing this morning, and it's why it's on my mind and on the mind of some other people, is how our business and how our economy is responding to the end of the challenges presented and the opportunities presented by the end of the European Union transition period. And I think that's something that we really, so we are uniquely placed, given that partnership that I described, to be able to feed back to government on those key issues. And we need to work out, I think, a plan for how we respond to that, those 2 challenges that I mentioned during the 2021, early 2021 period. But I wanted to hand it to a broader discussion. So I've got Graham Peters, then Joe James, and then Perry. So Graham, over to you first.
Yes, thanks, Chris. Just really picking up on a point that very much emerged this morning, and you were passionate about it, which is the fact that the infrastructure, if you like, behind our ports, behind our global gateway, is less than adequate. What was it, 8 miles or 11 miles of the last bit into Dover?
8 or 9 miles of key connectivity between the busiest roll-on, roll-off port in the world, and second business in the world, business in Europe. Amazing.
Yeah. It seems to me that it will be helpful to put into the global gateway page something about collaboration with Transport for the South East and Transport Essex about making sure the road and rail, if you like, behind the gateway is brought up to scratch and is something we fight and lobby for.
Thank you, Graham. Very good, very good. Joe James, and then Perry.
If I can just comment on our priorities and then just touch a bit on the economic recovery and renewal strategy. I mean, I agree with the 4 strategic priorities, but I'm just wondering, as skills are going to be a real key driver going forward, particularly with our current and future unemployment levels, particularly around COVID. I know that skills are included in some of the priorities, but I just wondered whether we should have a 5th priority. So we have a real focus on skills, because skills is going to be really important going forward.
You're absolutely right. It's our youth who are the real people suffering from this COVID crisis. There's no question about that.
It would show our commitment if we have it.
Yeah, quite right, Joe.
That was one of our key commitments. Yeah. I had put international trade and totally agree with the comments that Graham's just made. Yeah. And then looking overall at the strategy, I mean, obviously we're setting out our strategy and key objectives now, which is good, but I'm aware that our timeline doesn't really align with the government's, as they'll be issuing their UK Shared Prosperity Fund perspectives and their refreshed national, their national industrial strategy in sometime early 2021. So just to say, we do need to have some flexibility, and the spending review gives a glimpse of what the government's key things are going to be, and it's good that actually a large proportion of them are actually within our framework, but there are some that aren't within our framework. So again, I think that's why that flexibility is important. And final one, final one. I'm really pleased Helen touched on the levelling up across the SELEP area, because we're all hearing on the grapevine that the southeast should not expect to see any or very little levelling up funding. So we should be looking at, could we potentially look at putting together a short prospectus and evidence base on what levelling up across the southeast, or particularly our LEP area, looks like, and what we would need to do?
Yes, I think that's a very good point, Joe. I feel, as you know, I feel passionate about the areas of challenge that we have. I do feel we have an uphill battle. You get mixed we are receiving mixed messages. There's the official line, which Perry and I have been able to get from a couple of the MPs. So Perry spoke to Jackie Dell Price, and I spoke to Natalie Elphick. And again, the official line on levelling up is that wait till the prospectus comes up, but no areas being excluded. And then you hear rumours from politicians well connected within Westminster, saying that the political imperatives to level up for the north will mean that the south will find it very difficult. So I think we need to be really assertive about the areas that require levelling up in our area. There are some of the most deprived in the country, and we need to. I think that what you've suggested is a really good one. So thank you for that, Perry. Yeah, and then I've got Andrew, and then Anna Christie. So Perry, Andrew, and then Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Broadly in agreement with the framework, so thanks for all the work that's been done on that. I think the government has given a clue in relation to the future policy areas in the spending review, such as the levelling up and decarbonisation. And I think it's very important how the strategy structures those, and they're clearly identified in the links. And I agree on this whole levelling up agenda. I think one of the issues that we've got, if we don't get the money, how do we as SELEP focus on what really needs to be spent in those key areas to level up, even level up within SELEP? There's a couple of other things I'd mentioned, feeding on from Brian's point, really on the connectivity of ports. There's a bit of work being done by Transport East on that, so we can feed into the SELEP on that in time. But I think there's also a need for the SELEP to have a better river awareness. And we'll look at perhaps how we can do that in the new year, where we can bring to the table those that have got an interest in the River Thames in particular, and how we use that river. I think the other thing to be mindful of, that there's a lot of discussion on this 15-minute city, and whilst I buy into the concept, I also flag up the obvious statement that an awful lot of the SELEP is rural, and 15-minute city doesn't fit with that concept. So let's make sure that we balance that as to the communities that we have. So I'm supportive of it, just with those comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Perry. So I've got Andrew, Anna, Angela, Carol Ford, and Keith. And I think we'll, unless anyone's got any burning issues beyond that, we'll try and leave it there. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just to reiterate what Graham mentioned earlier about the infrastructure and linking that in with the global gateway and TFSE as well. But Helen
Anna,
mentioned,
you're breaking up a bit. Can you speak into your mic, because we're getting every second word.
Sorry, it's really linking in with what Helen said in terms of the transformational infrastructure investment. So there's going to be investment in terms of sustainable energy and digital capabilities. We need to make that stronger and link that into what Joe mentioned about the skills. We don't know what the skills requirements will be to meet the net carbon zero agenda. So there's future skills there in terms of sustainable energy, digital capabilities, but also linking in with the logistics and infrastructure projects that are needed to really make this UK's global gateway, and linking that in with TFSE as well. So there's bigger piece there that is needed, but linking it into the skills of the future in those areas.
Thank you, Anna. Very well, very good points. Thank you for that. So I've got Angela O'Donoghue, Carol Ford, Keith, and then Roger just snuck in there. So we'll try and leave it there if we can. So Angela, over to you.
Yeah, just following up from the points that Joe made. I think that we had this discussion last time when the 4 priorities were decided, I think,
yep.
About where skills should fit. And I think because I realised that I think these are the 4 priorities that we already had identified, and we don't really want to move away from them, do we, for the list? they were identified for the list. But what I would suggest is that we need to make a very clear reference to skills under every single one of those strategic priorities, because skills underpins it all. And maybe that might be a way of, rather than putting an additional priority in, that might be a way around.
Thank you, Angela. I agree, that's probably the best way of dealing with it. So I've got Carol, then Keith, and then Roger. So Carol, over to you.
Chris, just sorry, I think you had Andrew on the list as well.
Oh, excuse me, I did. I missed. I jumped over Andrew. So apologies, Andrew. Why don't you go first, and then we'll go on to Carol. Andrew, because you were
thanks, Chair.
in line.
I'm quite tall to overlook, really. Not to worry. Anyway,
difficult to tell on Zoom, Andrew.
I think the 4 priorities are excellent. Also, on the business resilience and growth issue, it's good to see that there's a support greater participation in R&D. I just wonder whether there needs to be more emphasis on projects like life sciences. We've been working with the Strength in Places bid, and it's been great to see that the South East SELEP has actually backed that as well. I think because that's consistent with your priorities. But also I just wonder whether from a business perspective, from the business community, they also would like to see more emphasis on life science and knowledge-based businesses as a way out of this in terms of growth and investment in R&D.
Yeah, no, good point, particularly as we've made a huge investment in the medical school and life sciences. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. So Carol, now it's your turn.
Just following up really from what Andrew said, and just a comment on something that Joe said. Completely agree. I think that we talk and reference research and development and innovation. And innovation is going to be what's going to be driving out of this in terms of the new future, if you like. But we don't actually articulate that within the objectives. And I'm just wondering actually if we should have objectives around very clearly saying about research and development and innovation, because there are going to be new sectors that emerge, there's going to be new businesses that emerge, there's going to be new roles, jobs, etc. that emerge from not just COVID, but also Brexit. And then just touching on the point about skills, it isn't just about skills in terms of young people. Of course, that's a real priority and important, but actually there's also going to be a reskilling of existing workforce. So just to make those 2 points.
Thank you. Now you're quite right about research and innovation. I mean, we just have to remind ourselves that the light at the end of the tunnel has come from the research that our universities are doing, the vaccine development, etc. is so absolutely critical. Well, I mean, absolutely life critical. So thank you for that. Keith Glazier, Councillor Glazier, you're next, and then Councillor Goff.
Thank you. Just 2 quick points. Just to reiterate the mixed messages. I was on a call with Chris Heaton-Harris, the rail minister, last week, where clearly he was saying that the opportunity to get HS1 into Hastings and Eastbourne would be, in his opinion, seen as a levelling up programme, and that he thought that it was very, very good to pursue that. And with the Transport for South East hat on, the outer orbital study is on now, which will pick up the port access and all the way around that point, and we've got the inner orbital starting very shortly. It's important that everybody on here that is invited has their say, because I think the consultation that we're trying to run is as broad as we can, and Chris, I know the LEP will have been involved in that.
Sure.
And finally, I've just come off a funding private opportunity for private funding for HS1 conference call this morning, where we've had investors join us, and we've said all along that actually unless all of us, so that's Kent County Council, ourselves, the LEP and Transport for the South East, remain tightly joined together, the opportunities will be missed, and I'm sure you're not missing those, but it is a reiteration from my point of view that collectively we are much stronger than we are individually.
Absolutely. No, any support, Keith, you know you can count on us. Well, certainly, thank you. And then finally, Councillor Goff.
Thank you, Chris. Just a question really as to what extent some of the things in which historically we as a LEP have spent quite a lot of time, many of the LGF related projects which have been often about unlocking housing and so on, almost by omission, that doesn't seem to be so much a feature of this, is that are we consciously doing that? It may not necessarily be a problem. It may be that this is the right way to tilt the LEP's focus, but I just wanted to be clear as to how, sort of, with what open eyes we were doing that.
That's a good spot. Adam or Helen, do you want to respond to that? That's a good spot, Roger.
I think what we've tended to do in the past when we've developed strategies is focus on, as we have here with the broad strategic issues, and sort of dealt with the management of the funds as a kind of operational day-to-day of the LEP. And I think to some extent that's the case here as well. I think what's quite interesting at the moment is really trying to guess what the future of funding for infrastructure projects looks like, and the role of the LEP. And I think, what we really need to do, and quite important for the whole of the network actually, Roger, at the moment, is a really good question, is to sort of be very clear on what we think, the evidence base is telling us about the strategic needs of the area, and actually have that up front and center in terms of, guiding the shape of the organization and what we put our focus on. And then when we do have responsibilities to execute in and around whatever funding stream that is, whether it's UK SPF or not, or something else, or whatever it is, then actually, we respond to that at the time in the context of the strategic direction we've set ourselves. I think what we observe is that, certainly what we get from some of the officials centrally is that they haven't spent an awful lot of time recently thinking about what local growth looks like beyond the course of the next few months, because of the bigger issues that are going on at the moment. And I think we've all taken it upon ourselves as LEPs to really step up and be very clear on what the needs of our respective areas look like, and what supportive role we can best play as an organisation.
Okay, thank you. That was a good debate. Do people feel that we can allow Helen and Sharon to revise, to take those points on board and agree the strategy with making sure those points are taken on board? Are happy people content with that?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Then in that case, we'll move on to the LGF update and spend beyond the growth deal period. I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon, who'll take you through a report which details the which projects are looking at spending beyond the end of the growth deal period. So Rhiannon, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, this initial report looks at the local growth funds, particularly focused on 5 projects that are seeking extension beyond the 30th of September 2021. The board has previously agreed that 6-month extension. Technically, the deadline is for the local growth funds programme is 31st of March 2021. So coming very close to that. The board's previously agreed a 6-month extension to that, and we're looking at 5 projects that are going beyond that date further. We've already agreed 8 projects that are going beyond that date, so it does add to the cumulative amount of funding that we're spending beyond the growth deal period. We're now looking at a spend of approximately £87 million beyond the end of this financial year. So it is a large sum of money, but the 5 projects we're looking at today, there's no real substantive delivery concerns around 3 of those, and the Plumpton College and the University of Essex are both seeking additional funding under the next agenda item that we're discussing today. The board has also provided a commitment to central government around the spend by the end of this financial year. Obviously, in practice, that's not going to happen. We are forecasting £87 million being spent beyond the end of this financial year. But to mitigate that, what the board's previously agreed is we'll swap that funding over to local authority areas so we can demonstrate that that funding has been spent. It doesn't mean that we need that firm commitment from projects that can definitely proceed beyond this financial year. So the second part of this report looks at 10 projects that are still identified as high risk. And I think, Chair, you've previously mentioned the February Accountability Board would be really important to actually make sure we've got full confidence around the delivery of these projects so that we can transfer the money to these projects. I think that was all I was going to say as an introduction, but happy to take any questions.
So any questions for Rhiannon on this a proposal to agree these extensions?
Chris, we've got Matthew Arnold and Perry Gladding first.
Okay, thank you. So Matthew, I'll take you and then Perry. Matthew.
Good morning, thanks, Chair. Just on the University of Essex proposal, can we have a bit of clarity on what the uncertainty is and what the additional funding relates to?
Sure. Rhiannon, are you able to respond to that?
Yes, can do. So yeah, the University of Essex, the university itself was previously due to provide a £5.5 million contribution to the project. On the end of this last month, so 30th November, the university did confirm it is still due to make that contribution. I think since we originally considered the application for this project, the costs of the project have gone up. So the construction costs have gone up, with material costs and things, and costs relating to COVID. So actually the additional funding they're seeking under the next report relates to those increasing costs. So the scope of the project remains the same, but it's just mitigating that cost increase.
Thank you. And Matthew, is that information sufficient?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then Perry, over to you.
Yeah, Rhiannon, just two general questions to me. One, are we really drawing a line in the sand on these projects now? And also, with regard to clause 5.7 of your report, is this more a decision that should be taken by the board rather than a recommendation?
Thank you, Perry. So, Rhiannon.
So on the point around where there remain deliverability issues, I mean, there will be obviously a conversation at the Accountability Board in February to determine, the appetite for risk, I suppose, around these projects and the certainty around it. So particularly in 5.7, we mentioned around, the transfer of funding. We're looking for that certainty around planning consent being in place, and the funding package, being confirmed. I think obviously they're key points for the board to consider, but ultimately it will always be a Accountability Board decision. It's only recommendations that we can put there around those points. So I'm not sure I'll answer your question fully.
No, I suppose what I'm thinking, Rhiannon, here is what's the role of the board here in this paper today? Because it's more, to me, for information more than any decision we might be looking to make. And there doesn't seem to be a line being drawn in the sand on these projects. And I understand there are going to be some projects that drift, I understand that, but how long do you let them drift, I suppose, will be the ultimate question, and for what reason. And if you allow one project to drift for specific reasons, that will lead to others. So, that was really the sort of issue that I had with this paper, even though the papers, I understand the papers, the issue I had with it really.
Yes, it's. I guess it's balancing the role of the strategic board to provide that oversight and direction with the Accountability Board, who are the only ones really with the authority to remove funding from a specific project. So I think that's why we're raising it to the attention of this board to perhaps give that steer. But for the Accountability Board to be making those decisions around where the projects retain their funding, always say, the February deadline is an absolute deadline, and if we haven't got full confidence around these projects, actually that's the point that we then reallocate the funding to the projects we're considering under the next agenda item as part of the pipeline.
Yeah. I mean, these slippages must be seen as the exception rather than the rule. I mean, because the growth period is supposed to come to an end in March 21. Councillor Woodley, Ron, I saw you had your hand up. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. I think in some ways I agree with Perry what he's saying, and we do need to protect the SELEP's reputation, whatever we do.
Indeed.
But on the other hand, we don't want to cause a split between each authority, because I think over the last year and a half that I've been back on here, it's worked very well. And this is why I've said before, it really comes down to yourself and Sarah to make those judgments as chair, vice chair, etc. So that we get that positive or negative result from yourselves, whichever way you want to do it, so that we don't cause a split with the LEP. And we do want to work together, and really the reputation does come down to you two as well.
It does. Thank you, Ron. The other thing I'm slightly I guess uncomfortable with, without further assurance, is this idea of that somehow transferring money that's unspent to local authorities is actually is actually something that we should be doing. How can, because I come from a background where, as chair of the Student Loans Company, where we were spending £19 billion worth of public money, and we took that incredibly seriously, of course, and we wanted to make sure that everything we were doing was absolutely by the book. And it just seems to me that this transference of unspent money to local authorities is, I just would like this assurance around that, and I'm wondering how I'm going to get it. Is it the city of local growth unit sign off, or is it the accountable body sign off? Because to me, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I'm slightly uncomfortable about that, and I want to make sure that we are doing things, we are managing public money appropriately, and we're doing the right thing here.
Can you bring Suzanne in at that point, Chris?
Yeah, Suzanne. Yes, Suzanne. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, I think I can offer you the assurance that that is what we're proposing to do under that option is entirely allowable under the grant conditions, and it's actually an approach that CLGU themselves endorse for all LEPs. Other LEPs also use that functionality.
Would other board members like some written assurance around that? I mean, of course we trust what you say, Suzanne, but I think this is quite an important issue. Or maybe people aren't as nervous as I am. What's the view here? We should get some assurance.
If I could say from a
Carol, yes.
public sector, if you like, I certainly would like some assurance around the fact that if this does get transferred over to local authorities, that it does get spent on the project.
Yes.
I.e. doesn't get lost. So
yes.
some assurance for me would be, yes. I think that's
sensible. So yeah, I think that's a slightly different sort of issue, and that's what we're working with those upper tier authorities. And when the decisions come to accountability board, it's the agreements that sit between us and the upper tier local authorities about how we ensure that that money is then swapped back in later on. I think that's one issue which we're absolutely aware of and working on it, and putting those into place. I think the issue that Chris has got is a slightly different issue about asking for sort of some kind of approval from government, which I can seek.
Well, it's actually, I mean, Carol's very clearly articulated the other fear I have, which is that to make sure that money that we hand over is then spent on the particular projects, which is it's sort of an extension of what I was saying. So yeah.
So yeah, they will be transferred over under legal agreements that are signed and sealed. So that gives us further protection over I can't remember, is it 12 years now under a sealed document, so there is we are putting in all those safeguards around that transfer and that we can have, but I can seek some written assurance for you, Chris, if you'd like that.
I think both on both points actually, that it's appropriate for us to do this and discharging our obligations, and secondly, on Carol's point, that we can have some sort of assurance that money we hand over is going to be spent on the relevant particular projects. So I think it's those two things. So I'm going to go on. There were three other people who had raised.
Yeah,
sorry.
Can I just advise? So I think we've got four people who want to come in sort of separately, but on this particular discussion, I can see that Rodney and David have got their hand up with a look to come in.
This particular issue. Okay, so I'll
yeah,
go to Rodney.
And Keith as well. So Rodney, David, and Keith, I think.
Thank you. And then I've got.
And then there are more.
They're not forgotten. There's Anna, Sarah, and Claire. I think Perry wanted to come back. So who was it on this particular subject?
So we had Rodney, David, and Keith.
Okay, Rodney, then David, then Keith. Rodney.
Thank you, Chris. Well, of course, you realise that upper tier authorities are the most honourable local element of local government that exists. That aside, but I think in the interests of the LEP, it will really centre on what monitoring procedure the LEP puts in place to make sure that the very things that Carol raised happens. And I think that is what we need to do and to have in place. In other words, is regular monitoring of those authorities to make sure they are delivering on the project. And I think if you have that, then I don't see a problem.
Thank you, Rodney. David.
Chairman, just to remind everybody, Essex County Council is the accountable body.
Absolutely.
That deals with the monitoring of spend, and I can assure you there are some very vigorous and very focused people who carry out those duties with a great deal of seriousness.
Yep.
One point I would make is that SELEP, thus far, I think, has exercised good judgment in terms of, if you like, managing and monitoring the projects that we have and allowing the slippage in a number of cases where there's been good reasons, mainly caused by the pandemic, which has increased cost, but also delayed projects, which is added to the cost as well. I think we've managed ourselves very well through this whole process. And I think we're doing better each time we meet to move forward. And once we come out of this situation with the pandemic, I think that you will see great industry and great focus and great determination to deliver economic growth, which is what everybody wants in this room in order to sustain not just the economy itself, but the livelihood of the people who we actually, as representatives of, need to make sure we deliver those results.
Yeah. David, you're quite right. I would also add to the disruption caused by the pandemic. I mean, also as the transition period comes to an end in 20 days, we can expect supply chain and possibly cost disruption as well. I'm afraid to some projects. Certainly, I'm in the development business, and I'm expecting it. Okay, and then Keith.
Just two quick points, Chairman, if I may. First is to reiterate, unless I've got it wrong, all of these are transferred under legal agreement. So, you know, and are monitored. And if I can just say, my understanding of the alternative is we send the money back.
That's true.
Either you trust us or we don't do it. I mean, I just find it. Of course, we need to be monitored, and of course, we need to account for ourselves. But I don't see any organisation where any of that hasn't already happened.
I know, Keith, this is not a suggestion from my side, or indeed I suspect, Carol, that this won't be done properly. It's just to make sure that that, you know, I have had a National Audit Office inquiry into stuff, and it's quite uncomfortable, and to make sure that we've actually got all the ducks in a row. That's all I'm asking for. Yeah. Thank you. So we'll now go back to I think I've got Anna, Sarah, and then Claire. So Anna.
Thank you, Chair. It was really regarding one of the projects in East Sussex.
Yes.
So it's to make clear to the board and for the minutes that the Bexhill Enterprise Park North scheme may not know the outcome of the planning inspector's decision by the accountability board meeting in February, because it's actually the meeting's actually taken place on the 19th of January. So it was really just for the record that they may not have an outcome by then.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Obviously, the accountability board will have to take any information that it has at the time into account. So thank you for that. So then I have Sarah Dance. Sarah?
I just wanted to add to what people have said and build on what the councillors have said. I mean, in terms of the accountability board, the ongoing monitoring is a really key area that we have looked at, and ensuring that the agreements are absolutely watertight in terms of whether those local authorities are delivering. And then just in terms of, you know, the reputational issue that Councillor Woodley brought up, I think that is there is a key issue there, but I think it is being managed incredibly well by both the officers and indeed the accountable body and all of us. I mean, I think the question that we have to continue to look at is, you know, how are we enabling enterprise and economic productivity to continue, and that's the question we have to ask ourselves when we're looking at these things. I did have just a quick question about the University of Essex one. If we don't approve the next bit of the agenda, i.e. the increase to their request, what then happens, or is that irrelevant?
Good question. Rhiannon.
Yeah, so I think we've already agreed that we need an update to come back to the February accountability board, and I think there were some conditions that needed to satisfy that by February they need to have the full funding package confirmed by the university and in a position to proceed. So I think it would be a case of going back to the university and saying, you know, if the additional local growth fund contribution wasn't made to the project, can the university find alternative ways of meeting that funding gap, or is that a showstopper issue then for the project?
Okay, Sarah. Okay, so thank you. I think that's, I think Claire has lowered her hand, so hopefully your point's been answered elsewhere, Claire. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to agree that the LGF spend beyond 30th September 2021 for the following 5 projects. So it's Plumpton College, Skills for Rural Business post-Brexit, and that's in East Sussex, Hailsham Polgate Eastbourne Movement and Access Transport Package for East Sussex, the Maidstone Integrated Transport Package in Kent, the Medway City Estate Connectivity Improvement Package, and the University of Essex Parkside Phase 3. Are people content for those to be agreed? Thank you. Okay, good. In that case, we'll move on to item 5, which is the LGF reallocation prioritization. And I'm going to hand back again to Rhiannon to take us through this discussion. So Rhiannon, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So for this item, to date, we've had £6.7 million of funding that's available for alternative investment. So we've had certain projects that haven't been able to proceed and is currently available today for reinvestment. What we're also hoping to do is establish a pipeline of projects so that if there is high risk projects that can't proceed and that funding is returned, we've got a clear list of schemes in a ranked order that can then proceed and using that funding, and for them to come quickly forward to the Accountability Board in February or March, then be approved before the end of this financial year. So that's the aim of the conversation here. We've had 13 projects seeking additional local growth fund through this process, a total of £13.9 million they're seeking. The way we've tried to present the information to the board today is using a kind of quadrant approach. So on page 15 of your report, you'll see a quadrant where we've tried to weigh up the kind of weighting of the federated board prioritisation, but also recognising where there might be any outstanding deliverability or value for money concerns for any of those projects. Where that's kind of led to a tie for projects, we've then looked at the spend to date against the projects, recognising abortive costs is something the board will want to consider when looking at these projects. We do present a draft ranked list on page 17 of the report. Just to emphasise that is a draft, very much for discussion today. We've presented it as weighted towards the federated board prioritisation, in the sense that where we've got a balance between the federated board priority and the high sort of riskier projects, we've given that greater weighting to the federated board priority, but actually the board today might want to have a conversation. So a conversation about whether it's the kind of the projects in 2A or 2B that they want to see higher up that list, or some kind of hybrids that we can sort of go through and work out today. I think that was all I was going to say as an introduction. We can share a version of the spreadsheet on the screen if that's helpful once we've heard some comments, and amend the list as people see fit.
Okay, thank you, Rhiannon. I'm not seeing anyone.
Sorry, Chris, could I just come in very quickly?
Yeah.
Just before you start the discussion, just for the sake of the recording, I just want it noted that given Karen Cox's interest in this item, she has stepped out of the item and won't be part of the discussion or the decision. So that's just for the record.
Okay, that's very important. So Karen has recused herself because of the discussion around the medical school, which of course is half owned by the University of Kent. Okay, so I don't see any initial observations or questions. So what do we do, Rhiannon? Do we move to the screen and then look at the?
Graham Butland got raised hand.
Oh, sorry, apologies, Graham. It's Councillor Butland, yeah.
Sorry, Chairman. I had some comments, but if Rhiannon's going to do a presentation first, I'm happy to come in after that.
I think what she's going to do, Graham, is she's going to put up a list of projects for prioritisation. Is that right, Rhiannon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take either way. We can present the initial ranked list, or if people have got that in front of them and want to offer any comments on that initial draft, we can then see if we need to make any amendments to that list. I think Councillor Goff was looking to come in.
Yes. Okay. So yes, Roger.
Yes.
So Graham, sorry, just on Graham. So you'll wait until the screen it comes up, and that's okay. You're content with that.
To, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
thank you. Okay.
Yes,
yes, Councillor Goff.
And I'm minded to do the same, actually.
Okay.
I think, again, the point could be made either way, but I'll perhaps wait till we see the screen first.
Okay, great. So Rhiannon, over to you.
Okay, I think, Helen, you're able to share your screen with the initial ranked list.
And again, if you want to, I won't be able necessarily be able to see you, so you'll have to raise your hand if you wish to make points, and then Adam will advise me.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the raised hands.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the initial list that's presented as in the reports. It does suggest a ranking. It does mean, based on the £6.7 million currently available, we would get down to partway through the Parkside, University of Essex Parkside project. So it'd be these top sort of few schemes that are supported immediately now. And then if we had additional funding returned to SELEP, the projects that sit below the Parkside Phase 3 project, they could then proceed in that ranked order as listed in this spreadsheet.
So just on that, so everyone's clear. So M11 Junction 8 doesn't make it on this basis.
No, that would be in effect the next project in line to receive
Right.
funding if additional funding became available.
Okay, so is everyone clear? Good. So any observations or comments? If you could raise your hand and I'll come to you. Roger, I can see your hand is up.
Yes, and I'm not sure if this was addressed by what was just said, but it is the question around the sort of balance between 2A and 2B and the priority given on those, because clearly deliverability does raise some pretty big questions. I mean, there's an argument one could have about whether the treatment of each federated board as being an equal number of projects at various stages wholly makes sense given the different populations involved. But perhaps you might say I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think the 2A versus 2B question is quite a significant one, because you've got a nice row of green down there under 2B.
Indeed. Well, it's not so much on 2A.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. Okay, thank you, Roger, for that. I mean, do you want to respond to that, Rhiannon?
I mean, what we could do is present approach 2, Helen, if you click onto that, which would then swap it around, so it would then be 2B at the top instead, and that would present a slightly different ranked order. And again, when we look at this cumulative total, so this shows the ask for each project as a kind of running total, which was take us down to the end of 2B there.
I mean, to me, deliverability has to be absolutely key, I think, because you may have priorities, but if they're less deliverable than some that are less prioritized, I think that's really key for us. So I'm going to go to Graham Butland, and then Graham Peters, and then Rob Gledhill. So Graham, Councillor Butland, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was raising the 3 red blobs and barrier to project deliverability. I mean, we do want to deliver. That is absolutely key. Estimated value for money. I'm particularly concerned about the M11 Junction 8. I mean, that is a major entry into part of the SELEP area. The connection of the A120, which of course, at one end has an international port Harwich and at the other end an international airport Stansted, and the links to the the north-south economic corridor of Cambridgeshire down in. So it is a key area. So I'm very much in favour of it being progressed, but I'm not sure what the barriers to project delivery are, and I certainly wouldn't want to support something that can't be delivered. But if there is a chance it can be delivered, I would very strongly support it.
Indeed. So Rhiannon, are you able to comment on Councillor Butland's question?
Yeah, so the M11 Junction 8, it's had a substantial increase in costs. So a tender exercise was completed earlier this financial year, which did identify a substantial increase to the project scheme. So I think earlier this year, we're reporting a funding gap of about £7 million. I think there is a suggestion that's working through Essex County Council's internal governance, which is for Essex County Council itself to increase its contribution to the project. And therefore, that's why it's seeking an additional smaller scale ask. It's at £1 million for that project. So on the value for money piece, it did originally have a value for money, which is about 3 to 1, which is fairly high, certainly a high value for money. But in light of that cost increase, we would want to revisit that value for money and just check we're fully confident with that revised total project cost given the fact it's increased quite substantially, we would want to review that. So it's certainly not a showstopper. I think our greater concern is around the funding contributions to the project and just that confidence around Essex County Council's own contribution to the project, having that fully in writing before we then award that additional funding to the project.
Okay. Graham, do you got any further observations?
I mean, there's other people on here who can answer better for Essex County Council, and I see Councillor Finch has his hand up, Chairman.
He does. So, Councillor Finch, you're on mute, David. Still on mute. No, we're not getting you.
I've done it.
Oh, you've done it. Yep.
Sorry, I was on a second screen. I was looking at the agenda on one screen, and on this other screen, I'm actually talking to the Zoom contestants, but participants, I should say. Can I first of all echo Graham's point he's just made about Junction 8, and in some respects, I think the fact that the ranking is a 3-to-1 ranking, it identifies the point that Graham was making, that Junction 8 is not just about easing and helping Essex, North Essex, and indeed the whole county of Essex. This is actually beneficial to Hertfordshire and to the Midlands and indeed the North, because it will help with the traffic flows, and it is significant in terms, in my view, significant in terms of the benefit that it brings not just to Essex and the east of the region, but also to the whole of the country as well. At the moment, we are in the budget process within Essex, so I don't have the numbers readily to hand, but I can assure you that I am looking at the capital programmes for Essex as the leader of the council and evaluating those projects where I need to look at putting money in. And certainly Junction 8 on the M11 is one of those that is a very high priority for me. And therefore I would ask you to take that into consideration and see whatever assurances you need. You let me have those statement of assurance, and I will see what I can do to make sure you have them in a timely manner so that funding can be allocated to Junction 8 of the M11.
Thank you, David. Okay, we'll take that under consideration. I would like to go then to Graham Peters and then Councillor Bedhill. So, Graham.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The Skills and Business Support for Rural Businesses post-Brexit is effectively a Plumpton College project.
Yep.
It's already been allocated LGF funding, and because of the inevitable COVID and other increases, it needs a bit more. The barrier to delivery is very straightforward. It's waiting for confirmation, ideally today, that the extra funding is available, and then tenders will be going out straight away to contractors in order to crack on, and it's well deliverable within the timescales we've been projecting. I'd advocate for it, I would, wouldn't I? But it's a project of regional significance. It's addressing skills needs for young people across the increasingly important rural agenda. Plumpton, a centre of excellence and driving forward in all sorts of ways. The wine industry in this country would be nowhere near as significant as it is without Plumpton graduates. And they're trying to do the same things for other skills bases in the rural area, both for young and for returning learners. So,
thank you, Graham. Okay, and then we'll take that into consideration, and then we'll go to Councillor Bedhill. Rob.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for my late arrival. Slight IT problems, to say the least. Very nearly had a computer that went Zoom out the window rather than actually logged on to Zoom. On the A13 issue, obviously it's down to 2-to-1 at the moment, is with an amber flag. Partially this is due to the withdrawal of the Lower Thames Crossing. If the Lower Thames Crossing does go ahead, which it looks likely it's going to, government's got been quite clear that it will still go ahead, even though it's been delayed a little bit because of a planning issue. That will increase back up to 3-to-1, which would then put us back into the green. Obviously, as I've said a million times, Thurrock Council remains fundamentally opposed to the Lower Thames Crossing. However, what is really happening is a fantastic shift change from Highways England. As we know, there's been a number of project managers in relation to this. Current project team are much better at engaging. I did praise them at an OSE board meeting about 2 weeks ago. It is completely different. they've acknowledged that Thurrock is going to be, the hardest hit. They've acknowledged that there are significant problems with its delivery, in the sense of being useful and supportive of Thurrock and its ambitions. And I'm even taking time out of my holiday between just before Christmas to call them and speak to them to see how this is progressing and see what how we can work together to ensure that we get the benefits in Thurrock, as well as obviously they get to deliver something that's going to be delivered anyway. So I would expect perhaps next time we see this list that we will be full greens in relation to the A13. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Goodhill. And I've got Penny Shimon. So Penny.
Very brief comment about, and I would be commenting on a project from East Sussex, but around the Fisherman's Quay in Eastbourne, which is a community interest company, a social enterprise. It's obviously been very hard hit by the current COVID crisis and is also in a process of uncertainty, as we all are, as to what the outcomes of the current last-ditch Brexit negotiations are going to be. But I would urge the SELEP board to actually stay behind this programme, which will bring great benefit to Eastbourne and to the fishing industry in Eastbourne.
Thank you, Penny. Okay, I think that is all who wanted to make observations. So what I would suggest you do, Rhiannon, is put the list back up again and see whether we wish to make any adjustments as a result of those observations and comments.
Yeah, we've been trying to make some tweaks in the background.
Okay.
Helen, if you're okay to share your screen again, I think there's a couple more tweaks that we might want to make.
Okay.
I think what we're proposing here is, obviously, again, for conversation with the board, I think comments been made in support of some of those projects in 2A, but I think there's perhaps been less support around the University of Essex Parkside project. And therefore, we're wondering perhaps to move that one down, which would shift those in 2B sort of up the list, I suppose.
So where is the cutoff then? Is the cutoff under that basis? Which is the project, the last project on the list to get funding?
I think we're at M11 Junction 8 would be the last project to receive funding. And then the Kent Medway Edge Hub would be the next funding to receive, project to receive funding if additional funding became available.
Okay. So, having made those tweaks, are people? I guess we have to vote on this.
Sorry, Chair. That does move the Eastbourne Fisherman project down, which I think Penny's just spoken in support of.
She has.
So perhaps that one might want to be moved back up the list. Perhaps. I can see Graham nodding.
And if we did that, what would then happen? Where would the cutoff then be? So what you're suggesting is Eastbourne Fisherman's Quay comes above, up to the.
I think where it was originally placed was just under the M11 Junction 8. Should we try putting it in there and seeing how that fares?
So is the cutoff still at the Kent and Medway Edge Hub?
Yes, I believe that is. Is that correct, Helen?
Okay, so on that basis, Eastbourne Fisherman's Quay is the last one to get additional funding. Yep.
Helen, can you just please just check the formulas in column I that the cumulative is running correctly, just to make sure. I'm sorry, in column I.
Yeah, no, the formulas are. Yeah, it's working fine.
Yep, just to make sure, just as we move stuff around.
Can we just understand? I mean, sorry, just before we just understand the barrier. I mean, there's a red bar against the Fisherman's Quay under barrier to project delivery, and I think deliverability is, we've acknowledged, is absolutely fundamental here. What is the barrier to the Fisherman's Quay project, and how will that be addressed?
Yeah, so my understanding of this is there are some issues relating to Brexit and actually COVID as well. I think some of the exports are reduced, and I think there is a risk around the local contribution that the fishermen themselves are due to make as a community trust. I think Penny used better phrasing than me to explain that. So there is a risk.
Community interest company, isn't that?
Community interest company, thank you.
Yeah.
So there is a risk around the contributions to that project. I think my understanding is they were looking for some additional time to understand the impacts exactly of Brexit and what that might mean for their financial position and their ability to contribute. And that's the reason we flagged there a red around that, because I think they wanted some additional time to understand those risks.
Okay, thank you. So I've got 4 people who wish to make comments. Graham Peters, Sarah Dance, Liz Gibney and Perry Gladding. So I'll go to Graham first.
Yes, Chris, I just wondered whether it's worth mentioning at this point the sort of probability of more money coming back into this particular pot.
Yes.
I understand it's not insignificant or highly probable or possible that significantly more money will come back in. But of course, until it comes, it hasn't come.
Correct.
Rhiannon
Correct.
would be able to make a
yes, there is a possibility, clearly. Yep.
On that.
Yep. Thank you. That's a good point, Graham, but we can't, unfortunately, we can't bank it at this time. Sarah Dance, then I've got Sarah, Liz, and then Perry. So Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to pick up on something that Councillor Finch mentioned, which was the importance of the M11 to not just the South East LEP area, but actually, other areas. And just to, and I seem to remember in the Accountability Board papers, there was the idea that one of the other LEPs might also invest in it. Is that right, Rhiannon? And do we know where that is, or have I dreamt that?
Oh, you're exactly right. So the our neighbouring LEP was due to contribute £1 million towards it, but they're not.
Which one was that? Hertfordshire or New Anglia? Greater Cambridgeshire.
Greater Cambridgeshire, because it is right on the border of the Stansted Airport. So whilst they were looking to contribute £1 million towards the project, that contribution's no longer available. They are supportive of the project, but I suspect they're in a similar position to us, where they're trying to they have committed all of their local growth funds, and they're at a difficult point to then reaffirm contributions to projects. So I'm not anticipating that £1 million contribution being available at this point.
Okay. Can I just ask a further question, which is, obviously some of these projects that are now moving up for many understandable reasons, a couple of them are projects that we've identified as high risk and in terms of deliverability delay. And it was just a question about that, really.
Indeed. Something we have to watch carefully. Yeah. Okay. We'll look at the list once more when we've just finished these points that people wish to make. So I've got Liz Gibney and then Perry Gladding. So Liz, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Just a very quick one. I'm just conscious of the A13 project having such a large allocation when it has got a query over its value for money, and just when we are looking at reordering things, just conscious that it does, just due to the scale of the allocation put to it, it does push a lot of things further down. I don't have a strong view on it apart from that. It was just a query based on the statistics.
Yeah, no, good point. Thank you, Liz. Perry, and then I've got Councillor Woodley. So Perry and then Rob.
Yeah, Chris, 2 things really. Obviously, I'm going to say this is the importance of the A13. Yep. And David Finch said earlier, this isn't just about the A13. It's a UK-wide importance that road Indeed. Is absolutely right. I just have a general point on and it's the way it's presented here, is that it's very difficult for a board to approve projects that have got red boxes against them. I think it's very difficult to approve. And I'm very, very supportive of the projects themselves, but putting in front of a board that you've got red boxes against them is incredibly difficult for the board to approve them. So I'd like to be able to sort of say to the team, can they remove the red boxes? It makes it easier for the board. But if not, the red boxes stay. It's difficult to approve.
Yes, I'm actually very sympathetic to that view, Perry. That's a good point. So either we can bring ourselves to remove the red boxes, or we can't approve. I think that's a very good point. Councillor Woodley, and then I've got Councillor Gledhill. So Ron, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm looking at the total here, and it's the difference between what Thurrock and Southend put back in, because we put our hands up very early to give the board and the SELEP chances to have some extra money, is 7.2 million. the extra funding that possibly might come in, does that exceed the 7.2 by a considerable amount, or is it still under the 7.2? Is my first question.
Yes, that's Rhiannon. Can you answer that?
Yes, there is a risk here that our pipeline actually isn't long enough. And we could actually, based on the fact that we've got 10 projects that are still high risk, actually, whilst we're growing a pipeline today, the amount of funding that comes back in February could exceed that. The mitigation for that risk is the board has previously agreed that we can transfer local growth funds into the Growing Places Fund, which will mean then we can use it as a loan and look at projects that we use, revisit which projects are supported using that funding next financial year. So that's the option we're looking at to give us a bit more flexibility and time.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Rhiannon. And so on that basis, yeah, I'm hoping that the rest of the board will seriously look at the projects in February, where we are and the possible funding. But I agree with Perry and with Glenn that the A13 is a key point, not only for Thurrock but for Essex, to get along the South Essex, to get out of this area. And I am very supportive of that A13. And with the other things from Southend, if we have got chances, then I'm prepared to accept that listing in the hope that we do have serious discussions coming forward, and that extra funding does come in to help support the projects on this list. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for that constructive attitude. Councillor Gledhill.
Thanks, Chris. Basically, well, partially both Perry and Ron asked those questions. Ron with the amount of money we put back in already, and Perry saying how important it is. Let's put it in perspective in the same articulate way that Graham did earlier. We've got 3 international ports just in Thurrock. At the other end, we're nearly touching the airport at Southend. Go outside of us, that links London, and again the ports further on into London, and indeed the airport at City Airport, and is pretty much the main east-west route from London all the way through to Rochford, effectively. Yep. Along the Thames. It takes pressure off the A127 and continues to do so. This should have been widened many years ago. Having it only as 2 lanes, I thought was a little bit of a cheapskate approach when it first happened, and that's pointing at government, not pointing at anybody else. It seems, why on earth would you have such a large area just, with a wide 2-lane road? It's ridiculous. So this really is key and vital. And I will again reiterate that the reason it's gone down to the 2-to-1 is because of the uncertainty of the Lower Thames crossing, being the fact that the Lower Thames crossing has been held up just on a planning issue, or a few planning issues, and which will easily be overcome, I can assure everybody. And if it's not, when we come back in February, then obviously we need to have a completely different discussion. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gledhill. Let's go back to, you've made the point very clearly there, so thank you for that. We'll go back to the list and just see whether there are any changes that we need to make it before we approve it. So, Rhiannon, can you put it back up again?
Yeah, we're just making a change. I think based on Perry's comments, perhaps what we could do is, rather than having it shown as red against the M11 Junction 8 and the Eastbourne Fishermen, perhaps instead it's prioritisation of those projects subject to the local contributions being confirmed on both of those projects. And obviously, that would be a key consideration by the Accountability Board when these projects are considered. So for each of these projects, they'll also need Accountability Board approval of this funding. I think we can make sure that that is in place before the funding is awarded.
Perry, does that make you, are you happier with that construct that Rhiannon's just put forward?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So on that basis, we have got Fisherman's Quay comes in. and the cutoff is at Kent and Medway Edge Hub doesn't make it at this on this round. Are people happy to agree that? I can't. Adam, can you see? I can't see how people.
I think we just need to ask members to please raise your hands electronically if you can, because I quite like to count the votes on this.
Yes.
Well, hang on a minute.
Councillor Goff, are you happy?
Chairman, I was indicating.
Oh, sorry. Come on. Excuse me. Come on then, Roger.
Yeah, no, just to say that I'm concerned actually with the situation that we find on the Edge Hub, given its strategic importance, and I'm not wholly clear why it quite sits at the point it does, given again both its ability to spend the money and, as I say, its strategic importance. So I do have a concern on that still.
Right. So at the moment it doesn't make it. It's requiring an extra 1.2.
Well, when the money comes back,
it will be the first one, Roger. And
yes.
We think there's a high probability the money will come back, but we can't bank it at this time.
Okay, well, I'm not wildly happy, but there we go.
Thank you. Okay, so we're ready to vote. If you could indicate by raising your right hand so that the Secretariat can record the votes. How are we doing, Adam?
We have, just give it another few seconds, Chris. We have 15 electronic raised hands. 15, Chris.
If people wish to vote no, how do they indicate that? Or abstain? Abstains is just not bother. But okay, 15. And what do we need in terms of majority?
I'll have to defer to my governance expert colleagues.
We just need
it's
50%.
10. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually 12 and a half because we've got 25.
Okay,
so
yeah, that's right. So we've got 15. So we have, how many do we have in favour?
We have 15.
15. Okay, so that's carried. Thank you very much. We'll move on. Before we move on to the next item 6, which is the Growing Places Fund pipeline, I suggest we have a break now because we've been going quite a bit of time. And so what I would suggest is people take, those of us of a certain age need to, after an hour and a half. So what I would suggest we do is we come back at 12 noon on the dot. So
okay.
you go onto mute and turn your cameras off, and we'll start again at 12 noon on the dot. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Are you there, Amy?
Okay, everybody, welcome back. We're now going to move on to item 6, which is the Growing Places Fund pipeline. And I'm going to hand over to Helen, who will introduce a report which asks you to consider changes to the Growing Places Fund program. So Helen, Suzanne.
Sorry, we're not quite quorate yet.
Ah, okay.
Roger, I think Roger has
Roger got a raised hand there. Chris.
Roger, yes. Did you want to? You're on mute, Roger.
So I am. So going back to our previous conversation,
yes,
I would just,
yeah.
Indeed, and more generally the approach we've taken. Can I just suggest that we talk about awaiting confirmation on the funding arrangements in a couple of the other cases?
Indeed.
We don't have a timeline on that, as far as I can see.
We should do. You're right. What would be reasonable?
The February
accountability board.
Yeah.
I think that does make sense. So is everyone happy with that amendment to make sure that we get those assurances by that time?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm content.
Good. Right. Suzanne, are we quorate now?
I'm afraid we're not.
Ah.
Councillor Woodley has his hand.
Oh, Ron, yes. Excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from what Roger said, and probably is absolutely correct, but if we do find there's problems on projects coming forward, rather than wait till February, maybe for peace of mind and for more unity, if projects can't become available, then let's not wait. Let's try and do it
by
during
correspondence.
December.
Yeah,
and
let
the officers know, so then we can then spread it round and take some of the worry and stress away.
Okay, is that possible, Adam, Suzanne? If we do it by correspondence?
Yeah, okay. I mean, people can let us know. What we will just need to do is just now we have Perry, we are now quorate. Can we just take that? Sorry, Perry, I did warn you. You are like the most important man on the meeting today because you're our quorum. Can we just make sure that we have got endorsement from the entire board that now we're quorate, that we will add a caveat to the previous decision that all qualifications and confirmations required are required to be provided to the February 2021 meeting of Accountability Board.
Yes.
Yeah, can people just stick your hand up just so we've got a record?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that if there's any issues, if projects come unstuck or between now and then, that we move to by correspondence, we move to accelerate projects that can be if funds become released, to take on Ron's point. Yeah. Okay, good. So onto the Growing Places Fund pipeline. I'll just repeat what I said because we weren't quorate when I said it. So I'm going to hand over to Helen, who will introduce the report which asks the board to consider changes to the Growing Places Fund programme. And Helen, over to you.
Thank you. So as the board will remember, a Growing Places Fund project pipeline was agreed at the June board meeting. And one of the projects which was prioritised for funding at that meeting was the Leaport Quay Wall project, and that received a provisional Growing Places Fund allocation of £3.5 million. It was expected that the project would be in a position to come forward to seek Accountability Board funding approval within 6 months of the project pipeline being agreed. However, this hasn't been possible due to a number of reasons set out within the report. It's therefore proposed that amendments are made to the GPF project pipeline, which will allow the £3.5 million currently allocated to the Leaport project to be reallocated to the next projects on the pipeline, whilst retaining the Leaport project on the pipeline for future investment. This change will allow the No Use Empty South Essex and No Use Empty Commercial Phase 2 Kent projects to seek funding approval prior to the end of 2020-21. It is expected, based on forecast repayments, there will be sufficient funding available to support the Leaport Quay Wall project from April 2021. The report also proposes that should a similar situation arise in the future, that and a project is unable to seek funding approval within a 6-month period as a result of deliverability issues, that the Accountability Board can award funding to the next project on the pipeline to facilitate accelerated investment of the available funding. As with the Lee Port Quaywall project, it is proposed that the original project would remain on the pipeline, allowing sufficient time for the deliverability issues to be addressed, but still be in line for future investment. I think that's all I'm going to say on that report.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Any questions or observations before I ask you to agree those amendments?
Ron, Chris.
Excuse me, yeah, Ron. You're on mute, Ron.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I agree. We agree with this decision, and I'm also pleased that we do recognise the importance of the Cockle Wolf. And thank you very much for doing that. And it's such an important situation, to Southend and to the LEP as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. So can I ask your agreement to those proposed changes? Just raise your hands, and then Suzanne can make sure that we're doing this legally. If the minutes could indicate that.
Yeah, we've got.
Yeah, we've got
unanimity on that.
Unanimity. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Anything else on that topic?
Yes.
Yes.
Where am I?
Graham, yes.
Trying to raise my hand. Yes, Chris. I mean, just really at some point, particularly if substantial chunks of LGF money come back into the GPF pot, which is by no means inconceivable, I do wonder whether we should review what happens to that money instead of automatically applying it to the GPF pipeline. We've reallocated GPF funding in the past to some really useful sector support funding and skills projects and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So I think it's probably a bit almost premature to make decisions, but I think it's an idea that needs planting now. So what might we do if we get a substantial, if we only get a couple of million, then it's, don't worry about it too much. If we get substantial amounts of money coming back, do we just automatically carry on chuntering down this pipeline, or do we revisit at some point next year?
I think we should revisit. Clearly, if you're right, there's significant sums coming back, and this board can then decide whether it should go into the GPF pot or in some other way. Do something else more interesting potentially with it. So I think I just note that. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the item 7, which is the Getting Building Fund update and pipeline. So Rhiannon, you'll talk about some changes on the Getting Building Fund programme, principally brought about by the Grays Shopping Centre project being unable to proceed.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, firstly, really fantastic news. We've had almost all of the projects approved by the Accountability Board now. So we've got 33 of the 34 that have gone through steers process, Accountability Board approval, all in a really short amount of time. And, with the normal rigour, high level of kind of assessment and rigour that we always apply to projects. So, that's fantastic news, and we're hoping to be able to start transferring the funding next month to all these projects. They can proceed. As you've mentioned, the Grays Shopping Centre unfortunately hasn't been able to come forward. An alternative project has been proposed by South Essex, and this is in accordance with the grace period process that the board agreed last time. So it was agreed that up until this meeting of the board, local areas could propose some changes to the projects, including the Getting Building Fund programme. So the Langdon Place project is proposed to come forward seeking 800,000. This doesn't fully utilise the allocation that was previously allocated to the Grays Shopping Centre that previously had an allocation of 1.8 million. And it ultimately means that actually there'll be £1 million available for reinvestment across the whole of the SELEP area. Not a huge amount of money, but it's right that we do that fairly across the area. The other change proposed, the first part of this report, is where the North Kent College project didn't require its full allocation. It means there's now 323,000 available for alternative investments. And again, KMEP, through this kind of grace period process, has put forward St George's Hub project to come forward to seek that allocation. These projects, so the 2 projects, will need to go through the business case process. We'll also need to agree these changes with central government. It sort of sounds a bit easier than it perhaps is at the moment. We have been assured that it will not require a Secretary of State decision. This is something that we can agree, won't need to go to ministers. It'll be down to officials and government to approve these changes. And change requests have been submitted to officers in government to approve the changes. But just before we go to the accountability board, we'll need to make sure we've got agreement from government around the changes to these projects. That is a point that's applicable across the whole programme. So government are being pretty strict on agreeing changes with central government relating to this programme, whereas for local growth funds, we've got much more flexibility over the programme. The second part of this report sets out the process, supposed to reallocate that 1 million that's currently available. But if any of the projects that we've approved aren't able to proceed to delivery, it's important that we've got a very short list of projects that can easily come forward for approval and spend within an exceptionally short amount of time. So we can make sure all of the Getting Building Fund is spent by the end of March 2022. So in this report, we're looking just to agree the approach to develop a pipeline. I emphasise again, it's got to be something very short. Currently there's only £1 million available for reinvestment. That could increase, but there's no certainty of that. Some of the federated areas have already looked at a Getting Building Fund pipeline. So when we're going through the previous exercise during the summer, they actually agreed their top few priorities that sat below those already included in the programme. So I'd really encourage federated areas to look back at that initial list and just look at the top few projects, to check which of those can actually proceed if they're awarded funding and can proceed within a sort of 6 to 9 month period. It's going to be very short timescales. So in the report, we also mentioned some pass-fail criteria. Again, this is just to make sure we're sifting out projects that are not going to be able to proceed fast enough to spend the funding. And if we do have a number of projects put forward by each federated area, we'll then again balance the federated board priorities against some further assessment around deliverability and strategic case as well. I think that was what I was going to mention. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I know that Councillor Woodley's got his hand up, so Ron, over to you.
This is probably a silly question, but I'll ask it anyway. Could that money be used on in section 5 with some of those other projects that has just fell below the line of the 6.7 million? We know those projects are available; they're ready to go. Would that not help that?
So I think government are being very strict on wanting to approve any changes to the programme, and I think it would really struggle to make the case of diverting Getting Building Funds towards existing local growth fund projects where there are no additional benefits to be gained, I suppose, of that investment. So government's been clear. Officers in central government can approve changes if projects are already included in the long list of schemes that were submitted to central government previously. If for us to consider any projects that are not on that long list that the board considered over the summer, we would then need ministerial approval, and the timescales for that I think are so unknown and could add so substantially to our timescales for approving these projects. I wouldn't recommend that we go down that route necessarily. So I think in this process, we're very much sticking to the projects that are previously being considered by this board and central government, so that we don't need to have that additional level of approval from ministers.
Okay, thanks, Rhiannon. You put me in my place, so that's fine.
Thank you. So what I'm asking you to do is to agree the inclusion of 2 new projects within the GBF programme, Langton Place and St George's Creative Hub, Gravesham, and also to agree the approach and the assessment criteria for the development of a pipeline of Getting Building Fund projects as set out in section 5 of the papers. Are people happy with that? Perry, did you want to raise your hand, or were you voting?
No, if I may, just one point of clarification. I think Rhiannon's just answered it, but I will just for peace of mind. We are talking here about projects that were on the reserve lists that we promoted back in June. We're not talking about new projects here, are we?
No, exactly right. So we're looking back at the list that we've previously considered by the board. Yeah, I think Carol might have also had a point.
So yes, I've actually got some. I just got some points now. So I've got Carol, Perry. Perry, that was Perry. Was that Perry? Was that your point? Yeah, okay, fine. Councillor Gledhill and Councillor Gough. So Carol, forward.
It's just an observation, I suppose, and perhaps a lack of my sort of newness to the board. But in the long list, I think it was 132 projects on that list. I'm just querying: is the ask that we're going to go back and review 132 projects, or are we going to be a bit more concise in that and maybe take the top 8 or 10 or 5 or whatever it might be for the amount of money and the time of the actual secretariat? Just a question.
Absolutely. I would really strongly encouraging federated areas just to look at those top few projects that were on their list and which of those can proceed. We don't want to have this big long process, particularly when there's only £1 million available currently. It's got to be very, very focused on, you know, which of those top few projects can we put forward.
Thank you, Carol. So, Councillor Gledhill.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies for the slowness. Our keyboard is going crazy at the moment. It's just in relation to number one. It's a shame that we lost the application from New River in relation to the 1.8. Yeah, that would have been a really good kickstart, but because of COVID, they've decided to sell that that site on. So please don't be surprised if in a year or two's time there'll be something very similar coming our way from whoever the new owners are, or indeed New River, if they don't decide to sell in the end. And I'm obviously fully supportive of the Lane Square application. Spoken to my counterpart in Basildon. Yeah, it's all absolutely fantastic. So we'll be getting my support, and equally one for St George's, as I've got family who live not too far away from there, but not enough to be declaring an interest. And it will be quite a boost. So that's pretty much all from me.
Thank you, Rob. And then Clive Soper, your hand's up. So over to you, Clive. You're on mute, I think, Clive.
Yeah, sorry, I'll put it up for the vote. I haven't taken it down, so.
Oh, okay, fine, okay. So we're great. So in that case, keep it there if you wish, because we're going to go to the vote now. Can we, if you're all in support of the agreement to those 2 items? Perfect. Is that Suzanne? Are we okay with that?
Just 1 second. I just need to go onto the other page. So if you could keep your hands up. Sorry, guys. I've got 2 pages today. But yeah, I think we're good.
I can see a full set of physical raised hands and quite a few electronic. So I think we're
wonderful.
Well, enough.
Okay, thank you very much for that, everybody. We'll then move on to item 8, which is the operations and governance. Suzanne, over to you for that, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So there are 2 strands to this item today that I wanted to present to board. The first are the operational priorities for the Secretariat for the next financial year, starting on the 1st of April 2021. These link to much of what we've discussed earlier on today, both through the earlier session on EU transition and the discussion that we had on strategy. The priorities for next year can broadly be grouped sort of into 3 kind of tranches. The first tranche is the delivery of our programme of investments and support. This activity effectively we've committed to already with the funding partners and with other partners. So whilst the growth deal period officially ends at the end of this financial year, as we've just been discussing, that activity is actually going to move into the following financial year. It's also the time to start looking at a lessons learned sort of process for that funding stream as well. The delivery of GBF, again, as we've just been discussing, is a key part of our activities next year and has to be delivered by the 31st of March. We've got a very hard deadline on the GBF programme. GPF, we also have been discussing, that continues into next year. The pipeline is coming forward. We have the sector support funds, which is coming later on the agenda today, that was partly funded through the GPF. We've got a number of projects that have come through now, and it's part of our response both to COVID and to Brexit. Also in that sort of frame, we have the skills and the business support COVID recovery funds, which will be launching early part of calendar year, but will continue into the financial year. We have the day-to-day work of the Growth Hub, which we agree with BEIS in advance of the financial year, and the continuing delivery of the Skills Advisory Panel and the Digital Skills Partnership, which are funded from DFE and DCMS respectively. The second tranche of activity that we have is our strategic priorities for next year. Once the recovery and renewal strategy is adopted, we need to move into some work around formulating action plans and really developing how that strategy can be delivered across the region. We've got some important national strategic policies that are boiling away on the back burner now that are going to hit next year, that Adam's going to give an update on later on, but they will need support from us. So that's around the free ports, the Towns Fund. Whilst they've been working hard on their Towns investment plans, there will be an ongoing role for the LEPs in that work. We also, I think this has been mentioned now a few times, and Chris mentioned earlier, when we get to the end of the growth deal period, when we get to the end of the Getting Building Fund programme, we also are coming to the end of the EU programme of investments as a country. We're pretty much moving into an area where there's a vacuum in policy around economic growth. That means we've got some real opportunities next year to help shape whatever that is that comes into that space. So I think that's a key activity that the Secretariat will be working on, supporting Chris with his work with Castle South, supporting the board as a whole on shaping UK SBF and other policy developments in that area. For those of you that joined the session this morning on EU transition, we know that the pain isn't just going to be there in that first week of January. I think, as Roger mentioned and many of the others mentioned on that we're looking at Q1, Q2, maybe even Q3 into next year. There's ongoing work, ongoing support for businesses. There's ongoing opportunities for businesses who may start to look at different ways of operating with the new sort of UK approach to looking at out to the wider world. And there's going to be a lot of work there for the Secretariat and our partners with Growth Hubs, supporting businesses through what is likely to be quite a tough time at the beginning of the year. The final tranche of sort of activities that we've got is our own governance. We, SELEP Limited and this board will have been in existence for a year at the end of February. And we want to do some work with the board, having a look at the effectiveness of the board and potential development opportunities where we think we need to look at competencies and things like that. And sort of a very important point for next year is that it's actually the final year of Chris's tenure, and we need to go out and find a new chair. Obviously, there's some big shoes to be filled, and looking, I've had some conversations with other LEPs that have currently been going through recruitment processes for their chairs, and they are saying it's a good 9 months process to be able to go out and get the best pool and do that piece of work well. So that is a long list of activities. Our resourcing plan just about covers that on the basis of our team as it stands. The operational budget was approved by Accountability Board in November based around that resourcing plan. There isn't any spare capacity. If additional activities do come forward, if there's new initiatives, new policies from government, it will be a case that we'll have to drop something to be able to pick up something new. Clearly, there's some stuff that we've got obligations about in that first tranche where we're signed up to agreements that we will have to deliver. Our governance is a requirement of our own internal structures. We will have to do that. It does mean that any changes that we have, any additional activities that we have are likely to impact on the strategic work, which unfortunately then would probably restrict our future effectiveness. So I'm just flagging that as a risk to board. So I just wanted to pause there and see if there was any questions about the operational priorities for next year.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Any observations or questions or comments? If you could raise your right hand through the chat function.
No.
Councillor Woodley, I can see has got his hand raised. Ron.
Well, I hate to be that. I just think the operational priorities seem solid. And then they look like they can be deliverable. So I suggest that we agree them. Thank you very much. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. I've got to look at the chat. Perry, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'd agree with Ron. The two things that I would perhaps add is, particularly under 4.3, which is the financing element of the Secretariat, which is on our agenda and we need to keep on the agenda. there is some strong words there about the well-being risk for the key staff in the secretariat, and we shouldn't lose that in the operational priorities. And we have a responsibility to that secretariat to make sure that particular staff are looked after. So I think there has to be an ongoing focus on the well-being of those staff and the demands we're putting on them. Thank you, Chair.
Perry, you're absolutely right. Clearly, everybody has been under stress and strain over the last year. I think that there's been the workload on the Secretariat in the last year, particularly the Getting Building Fund, etc., has increased. There's been no acknowledgement of that by central government, but the workload has certainly been very substantial, and it's looking like it will be continue to be substantial. So therefore, the well-being of our staff is something that we do need to think and reflect on. Perhaps I could take that offline with Sarah and with Adam as to, and maybe come back with some recommendations for the next board, because that's a good point. Just on the funding element, yes, that is being looked at. Just in case anybody missed it, the spending review did confirm the level of core funding for the LEPs for the next financial year. As the devil is a bit in the detail, because the absolute level of funding was confirmed. However, the allocation between the various different LEPs was not, and that is something that it will no doubt become clear, hopefully in the early new year. I would just remind everyone, because it was actually brought home to me yesterday, and I was looking at the number of MPs that we have as compared with the other members of Catalyst South, and I thought you might just be interested to know that out of the 103 MPs that cover the existing Catalyst South area, 43 of those are from SELEP, and so that means we're almost half of Catalyst South, and the levels of complexity that our LEP has to deal with, given the federated system, given the huge nature of our LEP and the 4 federated areas, puts a particular stress and strain on the Secretariat. And our Secretariat, I would hasten to point out, is no bigger, and in fact, in many cases, smaller than most other LEPs. So I think it's just a point that's worth bearing in mind. So we're a huge LEP, very complex, 4 different federated areas, from Harwich through to Brighton. It's a vast area, and I think the team does a really good job. Councillor Button, I see your hand is raised.
Dare I be a little bit naughty and say, is it too big? And we should be looking at whether the area is correct.
We've that, as you may, well, maybe you weren't involved, Graham. A couple of years ago, there was a big review of geography and everything else, and the conclusion was that we should stay this as well as we were. And indeed, actually, I would also point out that we do punch above our weight, and in the Getting Building Fund, we received almost 90 million out of that, which was far and away more than any other LEP and even mayoral combined authority. We got significantly more. So SELEP does work, and it does, and it has been able to, and both in terms of LGF allocation and in terms of Getting Building Fund allocation, we punch above our weight. There was one more chat that I just wanted to, one more.
Did you want me just to follow up, Chris, on a point? Just build, a point that you were making before about well-being.
Yep.
Just thought I'd use it as an opportunity just to let the board members know that we're actually going to shut the office down over Christmas. Yep. So the LEP team won't be responsive between Christmas Eve and the 4th of January. So yes, none of us will be working in that period, because I mean, like, you know, most organisations with an opportunity to do that after the year that we've all had should probably take that. But we've certainly taken that choice. So just to flag with all of you that we're not in the office between the 24th and the 4th of January.
Great. Okay. So what do we need to do? I think Suzanne's need to
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to come on to the co-ops piece.
I was going to agree the first, but agree the first one, the operational priorities.
Yeah, sorry, but I think we've also got Ron Woodley and Carol Ford have their hands
up.
Excuse
me. So I'll go to Carol and then to Councillor Woodley. So Carol.
Thank you. I think Ron was before me, but it's fine. Ron's okay. I'll take it. It's just an observational piece, really, with regard to the concern around workload and well-being. 100% workload capacity is not optimal.
No.
And I get that this year's been a challenging year for all sorts of different businesses, etc., and for all sorts of people in all different sectors, but that really does need to be a bit more supported, i.e. that should be between probably 80 and 90%.
Indeed. Thank you, Carol.
That's okay.
Yep. Councillor Woodley?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I agree. I think well-deserved rest over the Christmas period, and well done the team for doing it.
Yep.
But just one point, Graham, although he's smiling, he knows exactly what he's saying and what he's doing.
Good. Okay. We'll actually we'll do the next bit as well now, Suzanne. So why don't we talk about the the guidance around nominating and co-opting members of the board?
Yep, so just a very quick run through how the governance works and how the co-op sort of situation works. I was hoping that we'd never ever have to mention the LEP review ever again after last year, but I'm just going to mention it very briefly now. So one of the requirements of the LEP review was that all LEPs were restricted to a board of 20 full members and 5 co-opted members, which SELEP has moved to. And the requirements around co-opted board members is that they should have specialist knowledge and be appointed on a 1-year basis. So within the SELEP, the decision was that we would use the full 5-seat allocation, which we have got, and those seats are reserved to sectors, for the want of a sort of a better word for this. So there's 1 seat for higher education, 1 seat for further education, 1 seat for social enterprise, and then 2 seats for the borough, city, district councils, local authorities to be represented on the board. Now, the process for appointing the co-ops is that at this point, ahead of the forthcoming financial year, once board is happy with what the priorities are for the next year, it's a point for the board to sit back and consider what input they want from those co-ops, whether there's particular institutions or organisations within those sectors that would help further the work in the forthcoming year on those agreed priorities. The board gives its advice then out to some groups who actually nominate the individuals to come forward as the co-ops. So for the higher education seat, the actual individual is nominated by the U9 group. For further education, it is the SAG. For social enterprise, the social enterprise working group. It's slightly different for the borough, city, district council reps, as Chris just laid out. We've got quite a complex set up here in SELEP. So we have a lot of borough, city and district councils, and we actually have 3 shire areas, but only 2 seats. What the process is for the board to take a decision on what kind of area they might be looking for a borough or a district to represent for the forthcoming year to align with the priorities. So today, I'd like the board just to have a bit of a discussion about what advice they want to give to those nominating groups. I think one piece of advice that we very strongly need to give to the nominating groups is this board's commitment to diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, and diversity of representation. And I think that should be made very strongly to those groups, that we expect them to respect that when making their nominations. I don't have any advice to you, board, on the HE, FE or social enterprise alignment, because I don't think we've got any particular institution or any particular grouping or individual that would further our agenda any more than any other. So I'd leave that up to you guys. On the local authority nominations, I would suggest maybe that board does consider, given the update that we received earlier, that having a representation from the eastern part of Kent, from those parts that are going to be particularly hard hit by EU transition, seems to me to make sense, but obviously I'd leave that up to you guys. And we do have some key strategic priorities nationally, so it might possibly make sense to invite a local authority representative from an area that might be hosting one of the free ports, for example. But that's my advice to you guys. I would just remind board that this year the local authority reps have come from Essex and Kent. So you might want to bear that in mind for next year. We haven't had a voice from East Sussex. There is no rotation set out in the governance, but I think we do need to be mindful about future representations to make sure we have a chance to hear, again, that diverse opinion from across our geographical area.
So
Suzanne,
yeah.
thank you very much. I've got 2 Grahams who wish to make a point. So that's Graham Peters and Councillor Butland, and I see that Councillor Goff has also got his hand up. So I'll go to Graham Peters first, Councillor Butland, and then Councillor Goff.
Yes, Chris, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to Suzanne. Suzanne has alluded to the fact that I suspect East Sussex might reasonably, in the normal run of things, expect to have a representative from its boroughs and districts this year being put forward. However, I took it to the TES board, Team East Sussex board, the other day, that we should be thinking very seriously about the big issues this year, which are around ports, essentially, and Brexit, and that therefore I think we should stand sideways, and there's no right to us, nobody has any right to a spot at all, but allow representatives from ports, the port areas come forward. So some, in both instances, in Kent and in Essex, borough and district representatives close to the ports. That was accepted by Team East Sussex with a couple of, again, nobody can force anybody to do anything at all, but a couple of, I thought, quite reasonable caveats. One was that they should come from ports or close to ports and influential in the discussions around Brexit. Seemed to me to be perfectly reasonable. The next, that insofar as anybody can be reasonably guaranteed something, we should certainly get a seat next time round, which seems to me to be only fair. And a final sort of little tweak. Maybe in year 4 we might also have a seat as well, but then probably not in years 5 and 6. Just a thought.
Graham, that's constructive, and so thank you to you and your colleagues on Team East Sussex for those constructive suggestions. Councillor Butland.
Chairman, as one of the people concerned, I think I should declare an interest and probably not take part in the discussion.
Gosh, I suppose that is probably right. Suzanne, is that right?
I mean, as you don't actually receive an allowance for your position on the board, you don't have a pecuniary interest, so you can take part in the discussion if you wish.
Thank you, Chairman. In that case, clearly, I'm speaking not on behalf of either myself or Braintree District, but of course, yep. Essex districts across North Essex. We are clearly on the periphery. I thank Graham Peters for those remarks from East Sussex, because I think that would be of considerable help. And as I said earlier, sitting between Harwich at one end and Stansted Airport at the other end, whether it's me or would be up to the districts in the area to decide. But sure. I think that's very generous of East Sussex, and I'm sure will be very well received by the districts in Essex. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Anybody else got any points they would like to raise? So Roger, yes, so you had your Councillor Goff.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, just say the suggestion that Suzanne was making in terms of a port authority, and clearly for us, Dover is the most obvious fit, would seem logical. It is the one that fits both, well, a couple of the boxes that we just set out. And of course, sure. We did have the leader of Dover contributing to our earlier session. So
we did.
I certainly would think that would be quite a good idea.
It would make a lot of sense. It would make a lot of sense. Great. Anybody else got any points they wish to raise? Clearly, the advice I think that we would like to give to the interest groups, so that's the universities, the further education colleges, and to the social interest groups, are we very much there's no bar on people standing for a second year if necessary, and bearing in mind our need to try and preserve the gender balance, and we haven't had quite a balance, but the sort of the gender representation that we have, I would very much hope that Vice Chancellor Karen Cox, Angela Donoghue, and Penny Shimmin would agree to continue, if and that their organisations would continue to nominate them if possible. But that's just my personal view. But that's any advice that I'm personally going to give. That would be it. And as far as the districts are concerned, again, I think the advice that's from the board here is clear. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think a representative from a Freeport situation would be very sensible. And I think going through the transitions that we have with the EU, the pandemic, etc., I think the more stable we are as a board, the better it is for us. I don't think we should rock the boat too much.
No, thank you, Ron. That's a good point. So I also have Claire Lewis. Claire.
Yeah, so I would like to almost congratulate SELEP for doing a really good job getting some sort of gender diversity in the group, but we should look a little bit further than gender, whilst recognising that we need to get the same quality of skills. Let's try and look a little bit further than gender in our next step and just take this forward a bit further.
Absolutely, Claire. Of course, gender. Diversity is not just about gender. No, you're quite right. Thank you. Okay, Suzanne, is there any more that we need to do than that?
No, I think if board is happy to agree those priorities, which we have actually got a diversity plan is on the list of the priorities for next year as that much wider piece. If board is happy to approve those priorities, then I will take the advice that board has given today away and start speaking to the nominated groups so that I can bring back named individuals to the board for appointment in March.
So is everybody happy with that? Raise your hand. So are we okay, Suzanne? Adam?
Yep, looks like a clean sweep.
Okay, so that's item 8 done. I'd like to move on to item 9, which is the evolution of the Growth Hub and business support. Clearly, there has never been a time when support of our small businesses is more critical than now. I was going to say in living memory. I was going to say almost in human history, but certainly in living memory, it is absolutely critical that our small businesses get the support that they need to deal with the pandemic, but also the transition out of the European Union. So this is a critical point for us. I think that we obviously you've seen the papers. There's no one who's going to take us through this particular item, Adam?
Joe.
Joe. Oh, Joe. Yes, of course. There you are, Joe. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Got the starring role.
I'm mindful of time, but I will share my screen just with a few slides to summarise the essence of this paper. So evolution of the growth hubs, this is essentially looking forward to what we're going to do around the growth hubs in 2021. As we know, there are one-stop shop, there are front door for businesses to all of the business support landscape. Every LEP has one. And the majority of our funding for this service goes towards business advisors and navigators who help businesses to, well, navigate the complicated support landscape that's comprised of national programmes, region-wide projects and county and district level support schemes. We get core funding annually for this, beg your pardon. We get core funding every year from BEIS for this, but notably this year we've also received other funding streams, specifically responding to COVID-19, to the EU transition, and also to do some strengthening work around our Growth Hub operations. And this is through supplementary funding for this financial year. As I said, most of this funding goes towards the navigators and advisors that provide the support and, at the front door to businesses. And we have seen, as we've discussed before at board, the significant increase in the engagements that our Growth Hubs have had this year with our businesses. This shows that in the period from April to September this year, we saw a huge spike in interactions with businesses light touch at the beginning of the first lockdown, and that's gently cascaded down. Whereas as we've gone through the period of April to September, we've seen a gradual and steady increase in more medium and high intensity engagements with businesses as the impacts of the pandemic really start to be felt. But despite these high call volumes, we know that still only 3% of our business base in SELEP is accessing this service throughout the period of April to September. It's quite a low penetration rate, and it's not unusual, and it's not exclusive to SELEP. Business support is an ongoing challenge to engage with the business base generally. But it does present us with a task to increase the reach of our support through 2021 by strengthening the service in certain ways. Another task at hand is to become more flexible, agile and adaptable. We've had to do this year because of the changing nature of the impacts we're seeing. And we know that there is an expectation from BEIS that we use some of the supplementary funding to help to do this, to make ourselves more flexible and responsive to the market. And this needs to be done with the backdrop against some national activities that are now starting to emerge across the Growth Hub scene. First is a business support reform exercise or plan being undertaken by BEIS. This is specifically to look at delivering business support through LEPs and growth hubs, but within a national framework of governance arrangements to administer, deliver and enforce key functions. So effectively, this is pretty much what we do now, but they've indicated that this reform is really about joining up the dots between different government departments that are involved in growth hub and business support provision, such as MHCLG, CLGU, BEIS, DCMS, and it's also around setting a minimum quality standard for growth hubs across all LEPs. They've indicated that they want to start to operationalise some aspects of this reform from April next year. And running alongside this next year will be a growth hub evaluation exercise being led by CLGU, which is just kicking off this month, and we know will conclude with some recommendations some 12 months from now. So what we're proposing to do in SELEP as a backdrop and to utilise some of the supplementary funding that we've received to strengthen ourselves is to undertake 3 LEP level activities in Q4. Firstly, around an engagement and appraisal of our growth hub model to look where we can be stronger and more fleet of foot. We do this in collaboration with area colleagues and stakeholders to look at different options and best practice. And this will generate some recommendations that we can bring back to board for discussion and agreement next spring, late spring. The other 2 activities are around reviewing and improving our Growth Hub website, so we can look at extending our digital offer to businesses through the Growth Hub and ergo extend our reach in that way, and to look at optimising the data and analysis tools that we use so that we can really be confident that we have a fit for purpose evidence base to inform our work going forward. So these activities are outlined in a timeline together with overarching objectives that they will receive. And today we're looking for your agreement board on these objectives, activities and timeline to take this work through 2021, starting in January next year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jo. Are there any comments or questions or observations that people have for Jo on her report and presentation?
We had an early raised hand from Joe James.
Yes,
Chris.
Jo, I had you on my conscience. I wasn't sure whether you were on the last one or the last topic, which I've missed you, or you were on this one. So Jo, over to you, and apologies if I missed you last time round.
I had trouble logging in this morning, so I missed the conflict of interest. So
of course.
Now, because obviously we run the Growth Hub.
You do.
Across Central Medway, and also on the Sector Support Fund Declaration of Interest, because I think we're named in the South East Export.
Indeed.
Bit. But if I could just pass a comment, having said that,
of course,
if that's okay. It's just around the changes and the consultation that's put in the report. I just want to talk about that. I realise that the Growth Hub steering groups have got a good cross-sector of the business community, and they're really great to consult with. But as the Growth Hubs are key business support services championed by all the federated boards, you know, it's our key business support intervention from the federated area. Could potentially the federated boards also be consulted in the process?
Yeah, I'm sure they should be, Jo, should they not?
Slow anything up, but I just want to widen the consultation.
Yes, no, I think that's a good point.
Buy-in and the federated boards on what we're doing in growth hubs.
Yes. Joe, is that possible, presumably?
Absolutely, Joe. It's not actually put in the timeline, is it? But I think we see that very much as part of the bringing recommendations for discussion back to board next spring. It'll be part of that period of time, Q1, I suppose, after we've done some initial exercises to put together the recommendations and done that work with the steering group and with the growth hubs and growth hub steering groups to take those to federated area and then to this board. Does that sound okay?
Thank you. So Carol, thank you, Joe, the two Joes. Carol.
Sorry, yeah, I mean, it's just to elaborate a little bit more on the point that Joe James has just made with regard to the federated areas. I think especially given, and this is from a business perspective, especially given the SME nature of businesses contained within the federated areas, certainly Kent and Medway, for example, I know Essex probably as well. And I think it's great to have a review. Reviews are always very good in terms of what's worked well and what hasn't. And I think it's a positive to actually share where appropriate economies of scale across the SELEP area. So I'm congratulations on that. And certainly the collaborative nature of what's occurred in the last 9 months or so has been really lovely, wonderful to see actually. But also I think we need to also recognise one of the most successful elements has been the delivery that's been set out at a local level. And the knowledge that the growth hubs have provided at that local level. So I was also going to suggest that as we are a business-led board, it would be beneficial to get input from the review into the review at a local level. Whether that's a light touch canvassing of views, benefits, or whatever. The business advisory boards or whatever. So I just want to say, just sort of reiterate the point, I suppose, but I sort of spent quite a lot of time going through this yesterday in terms of sort of thinking, reviews are really good, but also we need to just ensure that we're not sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because one of the most successful elements has been the delivery at a local level. So
thank you very much, Carol. I think that those points are well made, and so we'll try and make sure they're incorporated. That's okay with you, Joe Simmons? Yeah.
Yes,
thank you. Okay, if there are no other points, can we agree the objectives?
Chris, there are some raised hands.
Roger and Penny.
Okay,
Roger and Penny have got physical raised hands.
Okay, Roger and then Penny. So Councillor Goff. You're on mute, Roger.
Sorry, I did it again. I think in terms of engagement with at a sort of federated level, it'd be good, certainly, I mean, Carol's mentioning about business advisory boards, certainly federated board members, I think as well, because I think there should be a variety of voices on this one.
Yes, okay, we'll make sure there's incorporated. Thank you. And then Penny.
It's obviously a timely review and to some degree dependent on a decision which is going to be made under agenda item 10. But I would hope, Joe, that we can ensure that social enterprises are included in the reach to increase the numbers of businesses that are accessing the support of the growth hubs. That's the objective there. So I'm putting our hat in the ring as far as the working group is concerned.
Great, that's noted. Thank you very much. And then Clive Soper. Clive.
Yeah, I'd just like to say as a business champion that we fully support the report, and from a personal point of view, I would like to get more involved. Certainly, we've got a policy forum within the FSB that covers the whole of the SELEP area. We've got 9 members. Located in places like Dover Docks, for example, significant businesses there. And if we can become involved with that and support, we'd be more than happy to do so.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you for that offer. That would be great. Okay, so now can we agree the objectives, activities, and the timeline to involve the SELEP Growth Hub service as outlined in the Appendix A? Everyone happy with that? Raise your hands.
Yeah, I think we're good there.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, in that case, we'll move on to item 10, which is the sector support fund endorsements. Adam, you're going to take us through this one.
I will, thank you, Chris. And I'll just make one remark on the conversation we've just had on the Growth Hub, actually, before I get started. It's evident to me that government are starting to look a lot more at, obviously the business support review that's been undertaken centrally is an indication of the fact that they are starting to look a lot at business support. But I think they're also, those links between growth hubs and LEPs are obviously absolutely integral in some places and different in others. And our model works really well for the LEP that we are. And we've got a really important job over the next few weeks and months to make sure that we continue to communicate that to the centre, because I think there are a few things happening around just seeing how responsive growth hubs are to some of the EU transition work and some other initiatives that are underway at the moment. We must, have a really close look at what we're doing there, making sure that we're as tuned up as possible. So I think that'll be a bigger feature. I think the growth hub generally will be a bigger feature of forthcoming meetings, just because it's so, much a bigger part of the whole family of work, if you like.
So Adam, can I just come in before we start on the SFS piece? I think given Jo's interest, we might need to recuse her for this item. So if you could just bear with us, Jo, we shall pop you onto hold. Just bear with us.
Suzanne, I don't know whether I should be recused from this as well.
Okay.
Because of the bid that's coming from the Social Enterprise Working Group.
Suzanne, sorry as well, it's Andrew Metcalf. Quick question. I'm also a board member of the Chamber. Sorry, apologies. I should have noticed that at the start. So recuse me as well.
Okay, if everyone could just hold on, we will.
Thank you.
Drop down.
Apologies.
So, as Anna, did you want to declare as well? So okay,
everyone.
Yeah, it's going to be a sorry. People keep moving.
We're still quorate, are we?
Yes.
Do I need to? Even though I have no pecuniary interest, but in the
no, I think you're fine, Sarah. Sarah, we've checked on yours, so I think we're okay. So yeah, we are still quorate, just about.
Great. Okay, so Adam, better move quickly before we don't become inquorate inadvertently.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was actually going to ask you, Chris, if you wanted me to go through the detail of each of the projects or not, because we've got a pretty rigorous process in place for progressing sector support from projects before they come.
The details are in the papers, aren't they?
They are. I was going to mention a couple of lines on each project. I mean, what we're looking for the board to do now is endorse the 5 of them that have come forward. I have to take the final decision on these projects. I'm very confident that they all hit the mark. We've done a lot of work in the background to make sure that that's the case. So I could give you a bit of a potted version of each of them.
Well, the board, the detail is in the papers. I assume the board has read the papers, so I think we can take the papers as read. So I think you can go through them fairly quickly. And if there are any questions, we can any member of the board can raise. So I would go through fairly briskly on Adam.
Well, I mean, if the board would rather me not do that at all, I think it's I'm confident that they're strong enough. Unless anybody's got any specific questions.
Yes. So Carol's got a
raised hand.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm muted as well. Gosh, that's really good. Basically, just very quickly, I just want to endorse the Good Food Growth Project. It was in terms of it actually keeping its underspend. If that's okay, because they were going to hold their Meet the Buyer event, they're now changing that to from a physical to a virtual Meet the Buyer event. So that's still going ahead, but in a different format. So I just wanted to support that project. Okay.
Thank you, Carol.
So just to be clear on that. Oh,
I was going to say, Chairman, I move the recommendations. I think the paper explains everything.
Okay, if people are content with that, then can I just have your agreement to the endorsements of those projects that are mentioned? Thank you. Everyone happy? Suzanne, you're happy with that? Yep. Okay, good. In that case, we'll move on. Okay, thank you. So, Adam, you're going to give us an update on a couple of national and regional initiatives.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to have most time on this item on the Freeport discussion, because I think it's much the most important element of this. Sure. But I'll introduce Alex to the board, our sector lead, to do that. But I'll talk about the other items first before we move to Freeports, just to get them done. So you'll be aware of the Towns Fund. That's one of the items on the paper, and the fact that the LEP sits on the boards for the different towns funds across the area, and just for the sake of clarity, they are Colchester, Grays, Harlow, Hastings, Margate, Newhaven and Tilbury. We took the decision as a board some months ago that we did, about a year ago in fact, that we covered that on an executive basis. So I actually sit on 5 of those boards on your behalf, and we covered the others as well through senior members of the team. Our input is really strategic. It's around making sure there's alignment with SELEP funding, etc. Obviously, there are a fair deal of those discussions that aren't appropriate necessarily for us to take part in, particularly when the different towns are talking about their specific priorities local priorities as they work into their town investment plans. But I just want to let the board know that we've taken full part in those discussions, that the discussions in each town have been, very progressive, very positive, and the different timescales that government have got in place for taking receipt of town investment plans have meant that the different towns have submitted their tips, as the shorthand is, at different points. One of the deadlines indeed is for today, and at least one of our towns is submitting their tip. Very strong area of work, some fascinating discussions, some great project ideas coming from each of those places. And for us, it's one of those areas where we'll watch it really carefully, because I think when we're clearer on what we've got in our armory to execute our strategy against over the course of the coming year or two, then our role in the kind of furtherance of the delivery of those towns funds deals will become clearer. But for now, we've had a good role in those discussions, and I think you'd all be really pleased to be able to see what those different towns have been doing. So it's a very positive one, I think, from certainly from my perspective. It's been really enlightening to be part of those conversations. The other thing I was going to mention was around
just before you do, Adam, I think Councillor Woodley had his hand up. Ron, did you have your hand up?
He's changed his mind.
Okay. Okay. All right. Sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
The other thing to mention is Catalyst South. Now, you've heard us talk about it quite a lot, I think, over previous meetings. I think Catalyst South is one of those things that we will feature very strongly at forthcoming LEP board meetings. It's going to be more and more important on a strategic basis to have those conversations. But just to replay some of the stuff that we've covered already, but just to give it its due prominence, really. Catalyst South, as it stands, is a really positive coming together of 6 LEPs. So that's us, Coast Capital, Enterprise M3, Hertfordshire, Solent, and Thames Valley, Berkshire. So effectively the LEPs that circle London. We are, I guess, a group of LEPs doing LEP stuff. Getting a lot of benefit from working together. We're starting to look at, where do our agendas come together? Where can we support each other? Where can we share what we do? Where can we, find even more efficiencies in what we do? And personally, I find it a really edifying process to be involved in, because obviously there are shared issues, and there is much learning from our colleagues. And in fact, lots of things that we do better than the other areas, I would say, as well. So it's all very so it's very helpful on that very sort of day-to-day basis. I think what we're looking to do now is make sure that we occupy the right space in the world as a collective. So we think it gives us a stronger alignment with organisations such as TFSE and indeed Transport East, because we can align better what we're saying and bring that more neatly into the work that we do as individual LEPs as well. And I think it's what we're starting to do now is starting to get a bit more organised around how we approach that. So Kathy Slack, who's the Chief Executive of Enterprise M3, is leading the charge for the officers. I've got the lead role now for communications around Catalyst South, which is a recent thing, but very positive. And really, it's just quite exciting, because I think what underpins all of this is firstly that we are encouraged by government to work in super regional groupings. So it's a response to that. But obviously, and as supports a lot of comments that have been made already, we need to do everything we can to support and to encourage investment in this part of the world, and do that in a LEP way, and make sure that we add that business voice, to the other groupings that exist, to the local authority voice, to the subnational transport body voice, and just make sure that we are very loudly heard. So, as I said, I'll talk in much more depth when we come to the March board meeting, I think, because we'll have more to say. But it's very positive to be able to work with our neighbours like this, and you know, a lot of the other activities that we're undertaking at the moment do allow for a lot more cross-border working. We're working a lot more with New Anglia on a few topics, as you can imagine. But certainly Catalyst South has been a real positive. So, you know, we'll see where it goes and we'll report back very comprehensively in future meetings.
Thank you, Adam. Are you going to move on to Freeports?
I will move on to Freeports. But
sorry,
Councillor
Glazier. Yep, Keith. You're on mute, Keith. Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, I just wanted to endorse what Adam has said. The concern I have is that I hear there was talks regarding closer collaboration with London, and I really do worry about that and think we need to have a thoroughly open discussion about it, because the only way we're going to get the right amount of investment in the southeast is to speak up for the southeast, because the government currently and the country generally speak about London and the southeast, and we all know where the money's going. Of course, we should have cross-border cooperation and talks, but I think the argument that I've made as chairman of Transport for the Southeast is that actually the Southeast is underinvested in compared with London. Whilst we have a TfL member sitting on our board, which is great, we work with them where it's appropriate. We've got to establish that we are the Southeast and not London. My personal view, but I think we need a discussion on it at some stage.
Yes, so Keith, as I hope everyone knows on this board, no one has been more cautious or wary or fighting the cause of the Southeast without London than me. The issue is that the centre doesn't appear to wants to talk to London and the Southeast. So the puzzle for me is how I square that circle of appearing to the minister to be agreeing with him, but as usual, as I've often found when I was working with the student loans company, doing the opposite, or trying to do the opposite. And so where things stand currently is that we've had a very strong steer consistently from government that they want to talk to London and the Southeast. The concerns I have are exactly the same concerns that you have, and it's one thing that I've been resisting time and time again. However, I think we're going to have to find some way of appearing to be working as London and the Southeast, but making sure that at the same time that all the issues that we care about that are important to the non-London element are accentuated. Initial discussions with the London LEP have been encouraging in that regard. And I think we're just going to have to, as with we found with Brexit, where an immovable irresistible force meets an immovable object, we're going to have to find a way of finessing this so that that we are able to get the attention of ministers in the way that they want, but at the same time make sure that the issues that we really care about, that are not London issues, are brought to the fore. And I think we'll see. We'll just have to see how this plays out. But there is a puzzle that I have to try and, well, not I, but we collectively in Catalyst South have to try and solve. And we haven't got the answer yet, but we're making the initial progress so far in discussions with London have been encouraging. But clearly, I really get the concerns that have been expressed by a number of you to me on this topic. So just make sure I've got other commentary on this.
So we've got
Chris,
we've got Carol, Anna, and Liz.
Okay, so Carol, Anna, and Liz. Yeah, Carol first, and then Anna, and then Liz.
I feel like I've spoken too much today.
Not at all.
I just want to support the previous speaker, to you, Chris, with regard to I'm concerned about us actually getting lost in the south or lost in London and the southeast, particularly with the levelling up challenge that we have, and things like coastal declaration getting lost, and you know, we have particular issues, I think, both in the SELEP area that are particular to us. So you know, I am very, very cautious and nervous about this London and us actually getting lost in this sort of you know, larger mass group, if you like.
Yeah, no, Liz, sorry, Carol, I yield to no one in my wish to championing the coastal communities. They are very, very, you know, close, dear to what the reason I'm involved with SELEP in the first place. So it's something that's really important to me, and I assure everybody that I will not take one step back in trying to push their interests as hard as I can. Anna.
Thank you. It was really just to reiterate what Keith Glazier has already said, and Carol as well, that I think it's that the politics of London are very different to those of SELEP, and I wouldn't want SELEP to lose its distinctiveness, which it has. It's created that. It's got a very distinct brand, but also it's just to make clear that the challenges in SELEP are very, very different to those of London. So we need to make sure that that is kept completely separate.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. And in fact, actually, one of the reasons why London actually wants to work more closely with us is because, for political reasons, they have found it difficult to get their message through into the centre, and they feel that in working with us, that political element will be diffused, and we can help them with that. But look, this is early days in the collaboration, and we need to bear all these things in mind. There's no question about that. So I've got Liz, Councillor Butland, Joe James, Perry, Clive, and Graham Peters. So
there's going to be a quick update.
Yeah. Liz.
I'll be very quick. Just to say that I agree with everyone's points about emphasis of SELEP, obviously, but the key thing for particularly the last two of our strategic points is the shift in the relationship of our area with London. And so I think it's something that we need to bear in mind when we're having these conversations, because certainly the conversations we've had, Chris, about how communities will work, it's this change in balance, which is really interesting. And so much as I completely agree with you about the dialogue, I think it's important for us to bear this in mind, because it is our changing relationship with London post-COVID that I think is going to be really key for our strategic.
Agreed. Thank you, Liz. So I've got Councillor Butland, Joe James, Perry, Clive Soper, and then Graham Peters. So Councillor Butland.
Yes, very quickly, Chairman. As those who straddle the sort of southeast and east boundary, and particularly when we're talking about coastal communities, I just wonder if one of the things, and you may already be doing it, Chairman, is greater linking with the Anglia-LEP. Because I think that is so important. If you think of places like Lowestoft and Yarmouth and Felixstowe, places like that, that might help if we've got two LEPs actually saying we are different from London and our issues. Thank you, Chairman.
No, that's a good point. Thank you, Graham. So I've got Joe, Perry, Clive, and Graham. So Joe James.
Yeah, just to say that, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, and those of us that have been around from the start know that we originally set out to combat the strength of London. But I realise that, you know, we have got to play the game to some degree. But I'm quite sure, Chris, that you'll be able to find a workable way around this that will keep us all happy.
You have touching faith, Joe, but we'll have to work out a way of doing it. Thank you. Perry.
Well, I'm firstly grateful for Keith for raising that, because I thought I was on my own with this one, and obviously not. I do wonder, though, Chris, if you will need to come back to this board for a mandate with regard to any formal engagement with London, because I think for peace of mind and also for the board's sign on to this, I think you probably have to come back to the board for a mandate on this one.
Yeah. No, I think you're probably right. I mean, interesting, Perry, you of all people would know how to work with London through the Thames Estuary Growth Board, because clearly, you know, you have experience of making it work and being able to get messages across. So I've got Clive and then Graham.
Yeah, Chris, I was just going to say that totally support you, totally support the previous speakers. We've had this problem within FSB as well, sure. In terms of we are seen by the northern members as being part of the southeast, which includes London. And the way we've always got round it is we've called ourselves the Southern Gateway, which I think very accurately describes the LEP area. It is the gateway for the country.
Yeah. No, the reason we actually, I think the Southern Gateway would have been a leading contender for the name for Capital of the South. The issue is that the Western Gateway had already banked it, and they're less of a gateway than we are. So we could have the Western Gateway and then the Southern Gateway. So that's why we came up with Capital of the South. Graham Peters.
Just really quickly, Chris, I think you made a point about the politics of London making their access to government quite difficult. I think that makes me even more nervous about getting much closer to them, if I might suggest. I mean, I understand everything you're trying to do and accept, but just a big...
I mean, I come back to the issue is we have to deal with the centre. We have to get their attention. They said they're not going to speak to us unless we are London and the South East. So therefore, we have to find a way of finessing that if possible, addresses all the concerns that I share them. I hope you know that I, of all people, have been trying to resist this. But it is, if we're going to get listened to, we have to make the communications in a way that will actually be received. At the moment, we're having difficulty as the Southeast ex-London. The other interesting statistic is that I think that of the whole of the UK, Catalyst South ex-London is about 19% GBA. London itself is a further 24% GBA. So you're talking about 43% of the GBA of the whole country. It is a super duper region, and it far outweighs the Northern Powerhouse, the Midlands Engine, the Oxford at Cambridge Arc, etc., etc. And so therefore the clout that we would have as a super duper region is it should be high. The issue is that the very, very important issues that you've all described are not drowned out in the noise from London, and the investment is fairly distributed around. And the very important issues we have around levelling up, around rural, around coastal, etc., etc. Those are the issues that I care about. I'm less concerned about London's issues. So as chair of Capital South, I would certainly be pushing all of those issues hard. But if I can't push them, they're not going to be listened to, and that's the problem. Okay, free ports. But I take the point, that I mean, at the moment, any discussions with London, I should just emphasise that discussions with London are at an incredibly early stage. The initial feedback about cooperation, about RSUs not being drowned out, is encouraging, but I'm not going to do anything without the mandate of this board. And I think that the concerns that you have raised, that I have, are to a lesser or greater extent shared in Coast to Capital, in Solent, less so in Enterprise M3, Thames Valley, Berkshire, and Hertfordshire. But that's just my assessment of the political wind. So the sort of areas next to us in terms of Solent and Coast to Capital are to a lesser extent than us, because I think we feel it quite strongly, but they also have concerns. Freeport, Adam.
Thanks, thanks, Chris. Very helpful discussion, and look forward to the next time we discuss Catalyst South in March. I'll say no more on Freeports other than to hand over to Alex, who he'll just bring a few slides forward, which really will give a bit of a guide for the conversations we're looking to have with the bidding ports over the coming few weeks, and then Alex will get on to the decision that we're looking for the board to make. So, Alex.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone. Afternoon, all. Conscious of time, so I'll try and get through this as efficiently as possible. So, just to be for some context, the free ports policy, if you weren't already aware, was published early 2020 with the aim to establish 10 free ports as national hubs for trade and investment, promote regeneration and job creation, and create hotbeds for innovation. So, following this, there was a consultation which we submitted a response to. Government published its response in October 2020 and has subsequently published a bidding prospectus which sets out the initial process, which is expected to lead to the establishment of 7 free ports in England in spring 2021. Governments encourage LEPs to participate in bidding coalitions. There is an implicit limit in the bidding prospectus of 2 free ports per LEP area. And we'll talk about the next steps on the last slide of this. We expect there to be strong Freeport applications from our area, and we're working with multiple Freeport boards in an advisory capacity in the development of these. So just to be aware, there's as the paper outlines, we're proposing a single agenda item board meeting in January 2021 to go through the submitted bids, which have to be submitted in February the 5th. 2021, and so this really is about setting out some guiding principles that we want to see in the applications coming forward for endorsement. So the board are comfortable that the bids that come forward for endorsement at the end of January have hit on those broad, high-level aims and ambitions. So we'll quickly go through them. So the first one, which has been referenced a number of times this morning, was levelling up. So it's about the Freeport bids that come forward clearly articulating how they'll have a direct benefit for residents and businesses in the local area, particularly deprived communities, obviously linking with our broader objectives and priorities as SELEP, but it's about the real term impact they have, not just business as usual. You know, what over and above business as usual are those free ports going to deliver to those local areas? Also supporting coastal catalysts, so building on what we've got in the coastal prospectus, for example, to support the ambition to close the productivity gap between the coastal and inland communities in the SELEP region, but also in a broader sense, increasing opportunity and hitting on the broader priority in our strategic priority, which was referenced earlier in the board meeting today around coastal catalysts and how this really is going to create innovation and attract businesses to the coastal area. So go to the next slide, please, Amy. The next one was skills. So obviously skills runs through all the work that we want to be doing in terms of strategic focus at the LEP, and obviously is a crucial element and crucial feed through that we will have as an organisation to the Freeport bids. And so we want the bids to be very clear how they'll promote and increase skills and training opportunities for the local community, linking to the broader principles of the skills strategy, for example, specifically around apprenticeships, increasing apprenticeships and industry relevant qualifications and opportunities for all ages, and it should really outline a clear plan of engagement and collaboration with those local skills providers. And then finally, the fourth guiding principle we'll be looking for from those bids coming forward is that around the UK's global gateway. So supporting our ambition to be, the UK's global gateway, promoting the role of the region in terms of global trade and enterprise, and working to align with our broader infrastructure ambitions. We've talked about, orbital infrastructure in the southeast, for example, at this meeting, and the broader infrastructure projects coming forward, like Lower Thames Crossing, for example. So making sure that those enhanced connectivity opportunities are maximised, and we've got a plan within those free ports to really build on the positive potential impact of new trade deals that might come forward. So if you go to the next slide, please, Amy. So yeah, in terms of the timeline, so as I said, bids are expected to be submitted on the 5th of February. So it's a very, very short time frame considering we've got Christmas in the interim as well. So those areas will be working on the bids throughout the period through to the end of January. When government receives those bids, they'll be assessed in March 2021 with the announcement of the first successful Freeport bidders to be in spring 2021. So I've mentioned it will be 7 because this is the England area bids. Could be at least 7, it could be more than 7 if government choose to allocate more. The other 3 that were originally allocated will be going to the devolved countries. So the potential role for SELEP post spring 2021. So if we do receive a successful or multiple successful Freeport bids, a governance body needs to be set up for those Freeports. There is seed funding for that within the policy. It has to identify a chair, a clear decision-making framework, and support effective decision-making and delivery at pace. We're not a mandated partner of the governance bodies as a LEP, but government strongly encourages LEP representation, and given our role to date on the Freeport bids, we would expect a strong role for us moving forward in the successful Freeport establishment, and we'll have 12 permanent members, up to 12 permanent members on those Freeport governance bodies. So if a bid is successful or multiple bids are successful in the SELEP area, we expect there to be a significant amount of work in spring 2021 moving forward, particularly in terms of making sure that they really hit the mark in the regeneration and levelling up aspect of the Freeport ambition. So that was a really quick run through. If there were any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Alex. So any questions or observations for Alex? Just so I'm clear, we think we can support up to 2 free ports. Is that?
Yes, so we think we can support up to 2 free ports. There's not a stated limit in the bidding prospectus, although there's an implicit upper limit of 2 because it says, 1 or 2 potentially. But the origin of the free port will be from the LEP or MCA where the main tax site is located. So currently we're expecting there to be 2 free ports that hit that mark within SELEP. Obviously there's one that straddles the border between us and New Anglia, where so it's critical where the tax site is located as to where
that's likely to be on the other side of the river to us.
It is likely to be on the other side of the river.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And there's nothing. I mean, given our geography, size, and also the length of our coastline, and our position in geopolitically, there's nothing we can't make an argument for more than 2, be able to champion more than 2. I mean, it doesn't sound like there'd be more than 2 for us than us to champion, but maybe there will. Who knows?
No, there's no limit for how many we could endorse, but I think there originally was a limit of 1 per LEP, but we strongly opposed that, and they subsequently changed their policy.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Alex. I've got Joe James. Joe.
This one's for Suzanne, really. I just wanted to know where we stand as an individual board member in our own capacity, not with our SELEP hat on, me with my chamber hat on. Obviously, I've been asked to, if I could endorse from the chamber perspective, from the business community, applications.
Joe, I don't know if it's just me, you're breaking up.
Get a bit nearer.
Thank you.
Because I'm getting near lunchtime, I go quiet when I'm hungry. Yeah, I just wanted to know where we stand personally. So as a chamber, obviously, I've been approached wanting to see if the chamber, on behalf of the business community, would endorse an application, which obviously we're looking at. That being the case, are we then able to take part in the SELEP as a board director discussion when we come to have that in January? Because that would also apply, I would imagine, to my public sector colleagues.
Yes. Suzanne, I think I'll ask you to respond to that.
So the main point of that will be around whether you have a pecuniary interest in the bid or not. So if you're just endorsing it through your role as the chambers, and the chambers aren't going to financially benefit directly from the endorsement, then I think that will be fine. We have a lot of people on this board who have various different links to different ports. So we're going, in the period between now and the January meeting, we're going to take some specific advice. So if people have got links to the ports, if you could email me and let me know the nature of your relationship with a port or with a bid that might be coming forward, that would be really helpful, so that we can issue you with advice in the run-up to the January meeting, so that everyone can be really comfortable that they're able to make the decisions that they need to make.
That would be great. Thank you. Any other questions? I got so yeah, Councillor Butland and Carol Ford.
Yes, Chairman. I welcome what Suzanne has just said, because of course pecuniary interests are not the only interests now, and so I welcome that. I think that's a very sensible way to move forward.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Graham. And was it Carol? Were you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Carol. Yeah.
Yeah. Probably just a basic question. I'm not sure one that can be answered now, but have we identified sort of the ports, or how many, or is it just we just have to wait for the people to bid?
We are, just to give you some reassurance there, Carol, we do think we know who the bidding ports are. We are involved. I'm involved, and Alex is involved in as a deputy for me on 3 development groups for the 3 bids that we know about. So I think if there's anything else out there that we don't quite know about, I'll be very surprised. But we are well aware. We are, I think we will just double check to all the kind of possible areas to make sure that we aren't missing a trick. But for those that we know exist, we know all about them.
Are we allowed to know?
I don't know, to be honest.
Some of them are public knowledge, Adam. So quite a few of them have published in the trade press that they're hoping to. Dover, for example, has published that they're seeking free port status. But in terms of the details, we can't. we can't talk about that.
So that's interesting. So when we come to hold the board meeting next month, 29th, what information will we have at that stage?
So we're going to ask each of them for all the information that we require for the board to make a sensible decision to endorse their bids. But obviously, there's a conversation to be had about what information is commercially in confidence and how we handle that. So that'll be very important to get right.
We may have to hold some of the board meeting in confidential session, as we do in the accountability board. So generally we would break, go into confidential session to discuss confidential items or parts of confidential items, come out of confidential session to take the final decision.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because we're obviously going to be looking at possibly up to 3. So each of those bids is going to have to give us information, which they may not wish other people, the other bidders, for example, to know. So are we going to be signing confidentiality NDAs or something? Or they're going to just trust us? Or
we need to be careful, because of what things that do get submitted to us will be eligible to FOI. So we need to take advice on quite a few things about this whole area. So we'll let you.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got it on the list, and so we'll provide details.
Yeah. Okay. So if that's it,
we've got a couple more raised hands.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. Yep. Who? So
Andrew Metcalf and then Graham Butland again.
Okay. Thank you. So Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Literally only to ask the question about the NDAs, and obviously how do we go about deciding which of the 2 of the possible 3 that we go about in terms of selecting, and what would be the process for that going forward? But obviously that's a new question. I'm sure you guys have got it. Yeah, it's on your list of jobs to do before Christmas, probably.
Suzanne, are you going to be able to respond to that, or Adam?
I think that's probably one for Adam, about how we would prioritise within them.
I don't think we're going to be in that situation. If we are in that situation where there are 3, I don't think there's a possible scenario where we would have sufficient information to rate one above the other. But I really don't think it will come to that at all. I think
of the 3 we know, it's unlikely, because the tax residence of the northern one is likely to be north of the river. Right. So it's in New Anglia rather than in SELEP. So it probably won't come down to
it. But the other topic that's come up a few times, I can assure you that we have got that front and center in our minds around the issues of NDAs, around commercial confidentiality, and making sure that we respect that, but also give the board members all the information you require to make a sensible decision on the 29th of January.
Yeah, I've deliberately kept myself out of this whole process so that I can chair the meeting on the 29th. So I haven't been involved with any discussions with any of the potential bidders at this time.
Sorry, Chair. Just to give some clarification, given we don't have a mandatory role as such within the bidding prospectus, there's no formal blocker to us endorsing 3 bids if necessary.
I see. Okay.
That prioritisation wouldn't need to take place on our end. It would need to take place when the government goes through its formal assessment.
Okay. Good. And I think Councillor Butland, you were the final question.
Yes, Chairman. Given that quite a bit about free ports, it's about their impact on local communities, skills, etc.
Leveling up.
I wonder whether you might give consideration, not to answer now, but through a short presentation to the board from each of the 2, 3, however many it is, so we could just examine that, because I mean that is a key point which is difficult to get over necessarily on a paper, and so I just wonder if you would give some consideration to possibly.
No, that's a very good point, Graham.
That's precisely the point of the 29th of December, 29th of January meeting. We'll be asking each of the bidding consortiums, Graham, to come forward and present and give some colour to what they've previously provided us with, and obviously the principles that Alex went through touch on some of the stuff that you mentioned as well. So we would expect some narrative around those key issues as they apply to our economic geography. So yeah, really, I mean, I must admit, I'm really looking forward to the session, because it'll be really interesting to find out, all the plans that have been developed, and hopefully, the board will be in a position where we can throw some really serious endorsement and support to what's come together.
Great. Okay, I think that concludes the questions and observations. So I'm going to ask you to agree the additional board meeting to be held at 10 o'clock on the 29th of January 2021 to consider the Freeport bids for endorsement, and agree that all known bidding consortiums should be invited to the meeting, ensuring commercial confidentiality is maintained where this is appropriate. Are people happy with that? To agree that? Great.
Yep.
Fine. Okay. So, any other business? I haven't been informed of any other business. Has anyone got anything else they would like to raise? No? In that case, could I thank you all for your participation in what has been quite a long, but I think very productive and constructive board meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Close it there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.